storm heat bled off the desert in layers after sundown, and the wind sat down like a worker at the end of the shift. That was our window. The contract called it night thermal stability. Air thin enough to leave the lidar less confused, and the ground cool enough to stop breathing mirages. I called it quiet. My job was to put a valley most people aren't supposed to see on paper. The kind of paper that folds into topo rolls and lives in a flat file with a red stripe. I was a cartographer on a short leash, contractor status, badge that opened only what someone else decided I needed. Gate 4 looked like a cattle guard that had studied geometry. The checkpoint shack wore no insignia, just a sodium lamp and a clipboard that moved from hand to hand without names. I idled the truck at the line and let the beacon blink a meek amber. The sealed permit rode shotgun in its Tyvek sleeve, heavier than the paper inside should have allowed, like there was more to the envelope than words. Contractor 97, the guard said, reading without asking. Survey cartographer, Valley 9. Affirm, I said. We kept to short words out here. He passed the permit under a scanner that didn't beep. I handed over my topo rolls and the lidar tablet so they could look for things that weren't allowed to be carried in. Cameras I hadn't declared, radios that might talk too well, stray curiosity. The guard wrapped a knuckle on the total station case. Calibration sticker's old. Restickered at Nellis this morning, I said. You'll find the entry on page 2 of the service log. He found it and nodded. I get paid to be predictable. The briefing happened in a trailer, with the AC turned to the temperature of a stubborn meeting. A map I wasn't allowed to keep glowed on a wall, an outline of the valley with hatches, like someone had tried to comb a river. The project lead, no name on the badge, just project, tapped the flattest part with a capped pen. Valley 9, she said. After sundown window 1930 to 0400. Stay off the ridgelines, aviation training east of the notch. Radio discipline, Channel 3 for safety, Channel 5 for logistics. Channel 2 is dead tonight. Dead? I asked. She made a face that stayed polite. Dead means don't use it. Quiet protocol in effect. Copy, I said. Channel 2 is the one we usually keep open for weather relay. I made a note to pull barometer locally. Orders versus field reality. If there was weather, I would be the last to know. You'll mark any legacy benchmarks you find, but do not disturb them, she continued. We're interested in drift, your deliverables, orthos at 10 centimeter resolution, contour proposals at half meter, and a narrative memo with anomalies. Engineering language, not adventure language. I don't do adventure, I said. The line earned me the shadow of a smile. They gave me a plastic folder with a single sheet. Field order. Project V9 Cardo. Contractor 97 Zone, Gate 4, Valley 9. Radio CH3 Safety, P25. CH5 Logistics, CH2. Quiet, Window 1930 400, Low Local. Deliverables DEM 0.1 mem. Contour Proposal 0.5 mem. Anomaly Memo. Constraints, no ridge silhouettes, no photogrammetry, no public GNSS upload, truck beacon on at all times. Below that was a little box, legacy bench, S27, rumor only. If found, found. Document, do not touch. I slid the sheet back into the Tyvek sleeve with the sealed permit on top and carried the lot to the truck. The total station's handle was cold through the case, metal cooled by the office air like a promise of night. I stowed it behind the seat, set the lidar tablet into its cradle, and clipped the topo rolls to the rack. The beacon woke to its gentle blink. I checked the battery on the handhelds. 2 spares charged, 1 in the holster. Truck fuel 3/4, water a gallon and change. The valley, when we took the graded road toward it, showed black against a rind of stars, a bowl without a spoon. Procedure first. It keeps the ground honest. I parked on a shelf where the dirt widened just enough to pretend to be a lot and put the truck nose west so the instruments wouldn't see their own fumes. Beacon on. Hazard triangles staged under the bumper. I set the tripod with the legs low, feet pressed into gravel until each made a small complaint. Total station mounted, 2 screws, third snug. I cited a feature I could trust, basalt shoulder to the south. And zeroed, wrote the number, then did it again because my hands believe in repetition. The wind had changed its mind and now moved from north to south, barley light, bringing mineral smell and something else that waited behind it. Not a bad smell, just wrong for dark. I powered the lidar tablet and let it boot through its early fidgets. The status showed GNSS lock on 4 constellations and a sub-meter promise if the sky remained polite. I set a baseline path, from the shelf down along the old wash, skirt the salt scar, cross the valley floor, ascend the low knoll near the center, and return by the western lip. Nothing clever. A loop a ranger could follow if I went quiet. Breadcrumb 1 came early. At the wash, a post stood where no post should be. Old wood, gray, with a shallow brass cap half polished by somebody's curiosity. The stamp read S27, but the 7 looked like a 1 that had been corrected with a second blow. I photographed it with the tablet as a generic marker shot. No EXIF GPS saved per order, just an internal index, and measured a manual tie, 24.3 meters to a basalt boulder with a vein like a frozen lightning. The angle to true west by compass should have read 90. It read 92 and a hair, and the compass needle burned slow. I chalked it up to local iron and wrote it in the notebook anyway. My notebooks are boring until a year later, when someone asks a question, and the boring becomes a map of what we didn't know yet. Breadcrumb 2 wore a clock. When I set the first lidar pass, tablet on strap, slow sweep at chest height, headlamp at low flood so the beam wouldn't blind the returns, the tablet logged time that did not match my wristwatch. The wristwatch, WWV-synced that afternoon at the motel, said 2012. The tablet insisted on 2032. 4 minutes and some spare seconds forward, with GPS time supposedly the adult in the room. I toggled the time source to internal, then back to GNSS, and watched the number march ahead by another second, as if it were eager. I wrote both times and circled them, because clocks are how a place says who it answers to. The sweep went clean at first, mesquite drawn as point cloud dust, salt patches bright and noisy, a ghost of my own legs where the algorithm guessed ground under my knee. Contours fell into place in my head as I walked. The valley floor showed a gentle tilt toward the northwest that disagreed with the sheet in my folder by a fraction, which is how mountains flirt. At the salt scar, the air cooled by 3 degrees in a stride. My pocket thermometer said so, with the indifference of tools. The smell that had waited behind the mineral note arrived. Coolant, faint and sweet, the kind you only notice when a building wakes after a long weekend. I looked up to find the source and met only stars and a blinking red far to the east, where the aviation training lived. I wrote the number, wrote the smell, and kept moving. Radio discipline kept my tongue. CH3 stayed quiet, except for a check-in at the top of the hour that came and went without my voice in it. I didn't want my name in the air more than necessary. CH5 burbled once with a logistics truck that couldn't find the spur road, then died like a pond at midnight. Channel 2, I left turned off, because orders said quiet. On the valley floor, the ground sounded like loose paper under boots, a dry rasp. I set a temporary backsight by sticking a survey flag into the crust, so I could check my line on the return. The flag refused to stand straight and leaned 20 degrees toward the center, as if the valley owned a slow wind I couldn't feel. I rotated it until the little reflective tape square faced my path and told myself the tilt was soil, not idea. Halfway to the knoll, I found the second post. This one had no cap, only the round where one had lived. The wood was fresher, cut with a saw that left modern marks, but someone had rubbed dirt into the face to hide the age. A pencil line wrote S27 in a hand that didn't want to be known. I measured the distance between the 2 posts by stride and by tape, my choice when redundancy is allowed, and came up with a number that told me the valley wanted to be bigger at night. Tape said 312.4 meters. Stride count, I know my pace within a foot on flat, said 302. My tape doesn't lie. My legs don't either. Something between those 2 truths had bent. I made a box in the notebook. Field note 2037. S27 cap at wash, brass 7 overwritten, tie to basalt with vein 24.3, secondary post wow cap, pencil S27, distance discrepancy 10 mm diff tape versus pace, tablet time plus 4 mine versus WWV wrist, temp pocket 3 degree over salt, coolant smell no source, radio CH3 nominal, CH2 quiet per brief. Truck beacon observed blink rate uneven. Timed 1.1's 0.9's cadence. I hadn't meant to time the beacon, but I did, because rhythm bothers me when it won't pick a lane. The little amber light at the truck, visible as a coin between mesquite, should blink steady. Instead, it breathed. On the knoll, I set the total station on the tripod I'd humped up the slope and took a long sight back to the wash. The scope framed the reflective tape on the survey flag like an obedient star. Angle and distance resolved to neat numbers that wouldn't embarrass a memo. When I swung to a second sight on the basalt shoulder, the scope fussed. Focus ring hunted a fraction, like heat ripples on a road that wasn't hot anymore. I leaned into the eyepiece until the rubber touched bone and held breath. The basalt edge seemed to bend a whisper toward me and back, again, like a slow nod. I told myself to recalibrate in the morning and wrote the reading without editorial. I allowed myself 1 minute at the top to look at the valley as a whole. In the dark, it was a held breath, the kind of place that teaches a person their own heart rate. The ridges to the east kept to their order. The notch held its absent stars where the training aircraft had scribbled contrails earlier. Far north, a white blink repeated in a pattern that wasn't on any pilot card I knew. 2 short, 1 long, pause, repeat. I checked my watch, 24. The tablet, left hanging by its strap, murmured 2048-12. Orders said no channel 2. The ridge said otherwise without words. I turned the dial with my thumb because I am not a machine. Channel 2 clicked alive to nothing, then to a sound I have heard only in tunnels and server rooms. A room tone that has chosen a frequency and is proud of it. Not loud, just exactly there. I listened for 10 seconds and turned it back to 3 because I don't get to pick all my disobediences in one night. On the way down, I set one more flag where the contour wanted to pretend to be steeper than the lidar would later confirm. The wind left the temperature pocket without goodbye. The coolant smell did not return. When I passed the first S-27, my chalk mark on the post sat where I had left it, but the circle of disturbed dust around the base looked narrower, as if someone had pressed the ground's hem. At the truck, the beacon blinked steady again. 1 second on, 1 second off, like a metronome that had found its song. I wrote the cadence without comment and turned to the tablet to close the pass. The DEM preview showed a valley that belonged to cartography. Honest noise, obedient gradients, a watercourse with the decency to pretend it still flowed. Along the draw, a ladder of returns ran like fence posts in a place where I knew there were none. I zoomed to confirm. The points refused to resolve into brush or rock. They stood as a straight line I had not walked, each at a regular interval my tape would recognize. 10 meters, 10 again, 10 again, stepping toward the center of the bowl from the wash, stopping at nothing I had flagged. I checked the time. Wrist, 21:02. Tablet, 21:07:41. Someone else's minutes had come to help. I called logistics on 5. Contractor 97 for V9 car tow. Request. Confirm whether any training markers or equipment have been staged in Valley 9, wash center line tonight. Silence. Then, negative staging, Valley 9 is cold. Confirm beacon on. Beacon on, I said, watching the amber coin tell me a lie it believed. Copy cold. I wrote my memo skeleton while the tablet processed the pass, careful, dull sentences that would make sense at an office light level. Memo skeleton. Brief. Window, radios, constraints. Methods. Total station, baseline, lidar, chest sweep, manual ties. Findings, legacy benchmark, WCAP, second post, time drift, temp pocket, scent, DEM anomalies, line features non-correlative with known assets. Requests, permission to expand perimeter 20 meters west, permission to document S-27 in detail, guidance on radio 2, quiet protocol as it impacts weather relay. The valley didn't move, which is what valleys do as long as we believe in them. The stars held. The knoll kept its little pride. My maps lived inside machines, not yet ink. I packed the tripod legs together and slid them into the case as a set. Routine gets you to the second night. It does not promise what waits beyond the second perimeter. Behind me, from the wash, came a sound like a loose page turning itself. Not wind, a single turn. Then the air decided it had never made a sound at all. I closed the permit sleeve back over the memo skeleton, as if paper could keep a place honest just by touching it. The truck beacon blinked once, late by a breath, and I timed it without meaning to. The page turn from the wash did not repeat, which is how a valley denies you the comfort of pattern. I let the truck idle long enough to top off the inverter, then shut it down so the fan wouldn't sketch its own map over the night. Beacon stayed on. I put fresh batteries in the headlamp and set my next hour as if I had not heard a thing. Confirm the benchmark rumor, reconcile the tape paste discrepancy, and see whether the DEM's line of posts would admit to being brush with delusions. Procedure keeps the ground honest. It also keeps a contractor employed. Checklist: 2105 local. Truck, beacon on, triangles staged, permit sleeve in dash pocket. Instruments: total station zeroed, tripod feet silt clear, lidar tablet battery 71%. Handhelds: CH3 safety 5.5, CH5 logistics 4.5, CH2 per brief off. Pocket, notebook, pencil, chalk, small prism, fiberglass tape, 2 flag stakes. Baseline, backsight set on knoll, return route flagged at wash. I started with the brass-capped S27. The headlamp on flood made the metal read milk instead of coin. The stamp 7 still wore its correction like a scar. I chalked the face for legibility and photographed it again with the tablet's anonymous mode, then set the mini prism on the cap and walked a slow semicircle to feed the total station angles something that could be believed. Readings landed without embarrassment. I added a manual tie to the same basalt boulder as before, 24.3 meters by tape again. Pace, at a count I know in my calves, came up short by almost the same 10 meters as earlier. I ran the tape a second time, slower, same number. I drew a box in the book. Field note 2114, S27 cap to basalt vein, 24.3 m, tape, 24.3 m, recheck. Pace, 10x strides, average. Computes valley scale, 3.2% versus tape on flat near wash. Hypothesis: stride compensation misled by substrate, counter, pace check on shelf should normalize to test. Smell: dust with a dime of creosote, no coolant. Wind: southerly 1-2 keen. Air: 22 degrees. Sound: none except beacon metronome at 101 Nero S, timed 30 cycles, steady. If the valley wanted to be bigger after sundown, it was polite enough to do it consistently. I decided to test the substrate theory with something boring, a calibration walk on the shelf near the truck where the dirt packed tight. I ran out 20 meters of tape on the shelf and walked it 6 times, nose to the horizon to keep my posture regular. Stride count on compacted ground matched the tape within a foot. Back down in the wash, on the cracked crust where dust lay like mica, my legs apparently decided the world was 10 meters closer than it wanted to be. I wrote that without conclusion, because conclusions at 2130 under stars are a form of gossip. The second post, the fresh wood with pencil S27, waited where I had left it, though my circle of disturbed dust had softened, as if a breath had been laid on it. I pushed a flagstake in beside it and cinched a tiny prism to the stake at knee height, then shot back to the knoll. The line overlaid cleanly in the total station scope, but the distance solution fussed in the second decimal, like a dentist debating a drill bit. I accepted the average and marked the prism height in the notebook. On the way back, I let the tablet lead me toward the DEM's ghost ladder. The point cloud had painted 10-meter intervals I had not walked, each a polite dot in the wash center line stepping west. In person, the dots resolved to nothing that admitted names. No brush stands, no rocks, no posts. Only a grainless sameness, the kind of bear that collects boot prints and leaves you nothing to date them against. I laid out the fiberglass tape along the imagined ladder and found the intervals true. 10.0 m, 10.0, 10.0, 10 little truths walking into the bowl. At the fourth post, the headlamp caught a gleam that did not belong to dust. A nickel-sized circle on the surface where the crust had been rubbed smooth. I set the tape down and touched it with a fingertip. Cold and not with night. A tactile oddity. The grit around it was warm from the day's stored heat, but the circle forgot the sun. I left a pencil cross in the margin of the page without added adjectives. I took a photograph in the same anonymous mode as the benchmarks. The tablet time stamped 21:42:19 against my watch's 21:38. The drift had grown by a breath. I opened the settings and confirmed what I knew. GNSS time source locked. No internal override. 4 constellations, 5 satellites strong, dilution low. The adult in the room was the one disagreeing. Radio check-ins sit on the hour in places that respect paperwork. At 22, I gave in to policy. V9 Carto 97, position wash, center line between baseline and knoll. Requesting one-time weather relay for borrow and wins. My voice sounded as if a different person had borrowed it. 97 logistics. Baro steady at 29.86. Winds 3 to 5 from south-southwest. Remind, channel 2 remains quiet. Copy, I said. Then because I am an employee, beacon steady. Affirm, logistics said, and let the air go. I marked the Baro number in my notebook, then pulled my own pocket barometer out of habit and watched the needle sit at 29.85. A sensible disagreement. I logged both. The way you write down words when two witnesses tell you the same story differently and both believe themselves. Below the knoll, there was a shadow where no shadow should have been. A narrow darkness laid like a surveyor's chain across the pale wash. I thought at first my headlamp had caught the truck's beacon rhythm wrong and set a strobe through the mesquite. But when I switched the lamp to a steady high spot, the band of shadow remained. It lay exactly perpendicular to the DEM's imagined ladder and intersected the fourth dot I had measured. I knelt and put my hand across the dark. The skin on my palm cooled as if a slow breath were drawn across it from the ground up. I pressed the thermometer to the soil. 19 degrees, 2 meters to either side, 22 degrees, a stripe. Not visible in the lidar as anything other than an absence. The point cloud there thinned by a fraction, like fog with opinions. Field note 2209, linear cool stripe across wash center line, aligns orthogonally to 10 Miberstein post series. Width 0.4 mi, temp 3 degrees lower than surrounding. No odor. Tablet DEM undersamples stripe, density 7%. Theory, subsurface void, buried culvert, but no legacy road on sheet. Will cross-check morning. The urge to switch to channel 2 arrived like a suggestion from a person I trust and don't. Orders weigh less than method when method smells a pattern, but I stayed with 3. Consequences cost fuel. On the knoll, I resighted the basalt shoulder to check for Hunt in the focus ring. The eye cup again touched bone. Today the shoulder behaved, crisp as a ruler. I breathed out and took the reading. Wind rose a breath and sat down again. Somewhere east the aviation training blinked in their own language. Far north the same 2 short, 1 long white flash stitched its pattern, patient as a sleepwalker. Back at the truck I built a small test that would cost me 10 minutes and no heroics. I set the total station on the shelf and established 2 fixed points with a taut line. A at the bumper, B at a stake, 10 meters due west by tape and compass. I shot AB several times, then moved the tripod 2 meters and repeated. If the instruments wanted to be funny anywhere, they would be funny here where the ground is compact and the truck's shadow is the only variable. Results came back boring to the second decimal. I drew a line in the memo skeleton. Methods check, tripod, A-B test on shelf, no instrument anomaly detected, valley floor anomalies not instrument derived. The sound motif for the hour returned, a single page turning itself in the wash, then silence. I wrote the notation and left it at that. I took a black pencil and shaded the DEM printout in the folder where the ladder points had appeared, ballpoint triangles marking each 10-meter step to give my eye something to hold. At the edge of my lighting, a shape the size of a fist sat where I didn't remember any fist-sized shape. I swung the lamp to it hard, half expecting brush. It was one of my flag stakes, laid flat and parallel to the cool stripe, reflective tape turned face down as if a careful hand had unwrapped and rewrapped it. I sorted motive before feeling. Wind could have done it if joints and tape remembered training, but the reflective tape had been peeled and repressed. The little wrinkles I'd thumbed down were gone. I am not sentimental about stakes, but I am possessive about lines. I reset the stake and photographed it, anonymous mode again, index only, and wrote the time. The tablet minted 22:31:07. My watch claimed 22:26. The Valley had borrowed 5 minutes now. It did not offer collateral. CH5 burbled. Logistics to 9-7. Reminder, do not disturb marked legacy monuments if discovered. Copy, I said, and thought of the pencil S27. Request clarification. What constitutes disturbance? Surface level cleaning for stamp legibility? A pause. Papers moved somewhere I would never see. Surface cleaning permitted, no digging, no pulling. Photograph, measure, memo. Understood, I said. A rule stated is a rule anticipated. I went back to the brass-capped S27 with a soft brush from the total station kit and whisked the cap's edge so the stamp would read in morning light, then chalked the lowest letters again. The 7 rewrote itself under powder the same as before, and overstruck 1 corrected with a second blow. I checked the pencil S27. The 7 there had been written clean and neat, as if the person wanted it to be a 7 very badly. On impulse, and because motives make better memos when declared, I set the lidar tablet to a stationary capture with a small ROI box around each S27 and the cool stripe. The device hummed to itself, building dense points like a printer working backward. The preview on the brass cap resolved into geometry too perfect for age. The cap sat not quite flush with the weathered wood. A shadow under the rim showed a lip with a clean gap where the board had shrunk and the metal had not, as if time had been put on hold for the cap. On the pencil S27, the wood grain ran wrong for cut date. Fresh wood grains carry brightness even at night. This one had been made to look old with dirt, but the pattern of the saw lines refused the grit, like handwriting that doesn't take ink in the same way. I wrote staged with a question mark large enough to keep me honest. Last act before the hour. A quick line traverse from the wash to the western lip to see whether the 10-meter ladder would accompany me or stay at home. It came halfway, dot for dot, then stopped at the cool stripe as if the stripe had said no. I stood with the tape at the stripe's edge and listened to a silence so thorough it found room between the crunch of my boot and the gravel. The beacon, faithful coin, blinked 1010, then 911, then returned to even. I did not time it. I do not always need numbers to know when a breath is late. I closed the tablet and slid it into the cradle, then tucked the permit sleeve over the memo skeleton again. Paper has weight out here that isn't measured in grams. I drove my palms down my thighs to knock off the dust, and found the dust reluctant, clinging a second longer than it had a minute earlier, like static that learned a new rule. I set my next hour, tie the stripe into a loop with flags, test radio reflections off the knoll without breaking the quiet order, and if the valley would allow it, walk one more 10-meter step beyond the place where the dots refused to go. The page in the wash turned itself again. This time it turned back. The valley had decided to speak a language of intervals and refusals. I gave it something I could trust back, a loop. Flags at shin height at 10-meter spacing, twine taut, tied from the wash ladder across the cool stripe to the western lip and back. A neat rectangle that would tell me whether distance still behaved inside a shape I made. The tape read out what the tape always reads. My stride lied by the same 3%. I logged both and let the loop sit like a hypothesis you can see. The radio test came next. Orders. Channel 2 remains quiet. My need. Understand whether quiet means empty or occupied by something that dislikes being named. I built myself an alibi in advance. Reflection study on 3 and 5. No transmit on 2. Listen only. Checklist. Twin 234 local. Beacon. On. Cadence 11S. Timed 20 cycles. Even. Handheld. P25. Scan off. Squelch 3. AGC on, record, function active, audio only. Antenna, stock whip plus clip-on loading coil, legal, orientation logged, NESU each 30s. Positions, A, truck shelf, B, knoll, halfway, C, wash, center line at stripe. At position A, the noise floor on 3 and 5 sat where a desert night keeps it, the soft grain of nothing. I read the radio's diagnostic screen the way you read a reluctant patient. RSSI 0 to 1 bars, idle, BER clean. I keyed a check on 3 at the top of the minute, 5 by 5, and logged the round-trip delay off logistics at 180, 220 min normal for this basin. At B, halfway up the knoll, I stood in the wind that wasn't and pointed the whip through the notch. Channel 3 went a shade quieter, as if the rocks liked my voice less. The radio offered me a ghost on channel 5, a single carrier blink that tickled the squelch and left a small LED thinking about it. I watched the seconds roll on my watch, 22:41 01 EO2. The tablet hanging by its strap insisted on 4:5:06. The drift had climbed to 6 minutes. I wrote it and did not argue with either clock. At C on the stripe, the radio's world changed. The noise floor lifted, as if I had stepped into a room-sized instrument, not loud, just more present, a pressure with a pitch. I turned the antenna north, and the signal meter showed a bar that did not belong to any of my channels. East, the bar vanished. South, 2 bars. West, back to 1, then none. I took the coil off and on again, no change. A living null at a single orientation. I listened to channel 2 with the volume rolled to a thread and the transmit key clipped under a rubber band to remind me not to press it. Channel 2 held the room tone I'd heard on the knoll, a selected hum with dignity. No voice, no IDs. I recorded 30 seconds and wrote the impression down in work language. Narrowband carrier-like presence on C82, presumed site-generated interference, constant within stripe, fades at +3 m. I do not write hums like a transformer in a church basement, not because it isn't true, but because memos do not accept similes. Evidence breadcrumb 1 made itself. When I stood with one boot inside the stripe and one out, the handheld clock took a short breath forward, not the watch. Its second hand kept its union pace. The radio's timestamp, for recorded clips, jumped by 1 second without the minute rolling with it, a misstep a device should never permit. I power cycled the unit and held my thumb on the log button to marker it. The time returned to where it had been, plus the cheat. I wrote that in a box big enough to be found later. Evidence breadcrumb 2 wore a path. I tried to walk the 10-meter ladder west, one step beyond where it had refused me. The tape gave me 10 meters. The ground gave me 9-point-something that felt like 10 to my legs and refused to sum that odd meter back into the loop. The twine along my rectangle looked unchanged, but the arc between flags took a lazier curve, like fabric that threatens to pucker. I tightened it and watched the reflective tags wink like compliant animals in the headlamp. Smell stayed simple, dust and the ordinary creosote. The coolant sweetness did not return. Tactile oddity traded places. The dirt at the stripe felt unwilling to take a boot print, crisp at the edges but with a memory that rebounded into a shallower depth a second after I lifted my heel. I pressed my palm and counted. 1, 2, rise. The thermometer said 19 degree on the stripe, 22 degree off, as before. I took the total station down to the stripe to get a hard distance across the narrow. The scope found the reflective tape on the opposite flag and settled. Distance returned with a wobble in the hundredths place, the way a measuring head does when heat is trying to be a lens. No heat here to speak of. I took 5 readings and averaged. The number landed fine. When I swung to a quick check on the basalt shoulder, the focus ring did not hunt at all. Perfect, clinical. The thing that misbehaved wanted me to look in only one place. Document insert, 2258 to 23 bar. CH3 check-in, logistics, 97 safety check, me. 97 at stripe, loop constructed, no hazards. Logistics, copy, reminder, aviation east of notch active until 2310. Me, affirm. The aviation made its own breadcrumb. 10 minutes later the notch brightened with a white sweep that should have dissolved into distance. Instead it reached the valley floor with no dimming I could chart, the way a searchlight behaves in thin fog you cannot see until a beam finds it. The beam did not cut, it stroked. The stripe brightened by a color's worth and then returned to its dimmer version when the aircraft banked. I recorded that and wrote for the memo. Optical scatter atypical. Beam persistence on stripe suggests particulate layer, but local RH low, no halo off breath. Orders versus method pressed a thumb on my shoulder. Channel 2 would tell me more in 10 seconds than guesswork would in an hour. I made a choice and paid for it by writing my name under it. I tuned to 2 and pressed record. Receive only. I held the antenna parallel to the stripe and swept north through west. The room tone hardened at west, northwest, and sprouted a faint modulation, as if a voice had been erased but left its shape, not words. A cadence, low, low, high, pause, low, repeating like the white blink I'd logged far north. The radio's display refused any network ID. The timestamp crept, my watch did not. I looked at the truck, the only warm rectangle in the world. The beacon blinked even, then mislaid a beat, then even. I let it be. I walked the loop one more time to see if a loop could teach me anything new. It did. Where the rectangle crossed the wash, centerline the flags had revolved on their stakes so the reflective squares all faced the same direction, toward the knoll. I had left them random. It is possible for a wind to give things a preference. It is less possible for that preference to point to my backside like a class of good students. I took the topo rolls out of the cab and unrolled the preliminary hatch map on the truck bed to give my mind paper instead of pixels. The valley drew as a proper basin with proper shoulders. My pencil added the stripe, the ladder, both S27s, the knoll lines, the notch. I penciled bearings and wrote distances in neat black, so morning me would not accuse night me of making a mess. When I lifted the pencil to rest it, The tip kept drawing a hairline north by itself. A trick of my wrist, I told myself. I parked the pencil in the rack and pressed the sheet flat with my palm until it would not curl. I set a tiny test. 2 radios, 1 on 3, 1 on 2 in record, set 1 meter apart on the truck bed, mics covered so their LEDs would not telegraph my curiosity to any pilot with glass. I walked 30 meters into the loop and keyed 3 with a 10 count. 1, 2, 3. Logistics returned my check with a clip of approval. On 2 in the record, the room tone made a decision. It climbed by a small fraction at the same rhythm as my numbers. Later, in headphones, I knew I'd hear the breath of a response that had refused to become speech. At the stripe, the page turning happened again. This time not single, 2 pages. Then a pause and 1 returning to where it had been. A librarian in a wind. I do not assign intent, I assign sequence. I marked 2, then 1 back, and let the margin hold that. Midnight approached by the tablet more quickly than by my watch. My memo skeleton grew a new section. Radio, CH3 nominal, CH5 intermittent carrier blips at null, CH2 listen only reveals narrowband tone with cadence. Stripe acts as oriented antenna, RSSI dependent on heading. Recorded time, drift on device, 1 second skip, likely linked to stripe crossing. I asked for permission the ordinary way. Logistics, 9-7 request. Advise on temporary expansion west of loop by 20 meters to test DEM ladder continuation and radio behavior. Silence a full 10 seconds too long. Then, negative on expansion tonight. Maintain current boundary. Reminder, quiet protocol remains in effect. Copy, I said, and added the cost to the ledger I keep under my ribs. I broke down the knoll backsite and resighted it from a new tripod location 2 meters down slope. Small change, new angle on the same truth. The line settled without fuss. I took a last pass over the ladder with the lidar at shoulder height and watched the returns draw their neat invisible fence. At the 4th step, the tablet hiccuped and decided it still knew time. The recording file stamped "Duriwu" while my watch stuck to 23:56. I wrote both, no adjectives. When I turned back to the truck, the 2 handhelds on the bed had twisted in their nylon leashes, so their antenna tips touched. I could tell myself a dozen reasons nylon does that in the night. Weight memory, vibrations from the engine block cooling, a mastered curve. I still separated them and logged separation reset, because future me deserves honesty. I closed the permit sleeve over the topo rolls and set my next hour. Finished the loop with a second pass, document S27 cap depth by non-contact trick, magnet plus feeler gauge, and if logistics would not allow west, then test inside. See whether the stripe's null moved when the beacon did. The white blink to the north gave me its 2 short, 1 long again. Channel 2's room tone answered by climbing a breath on the long. The page in the wash turned toward the knoll. Midnight by the tablet, 23:54 by my wrist. The valley was 2 clocks and 1 set of lines that refused to stay where I put them. If I couldn't go west, I would let the west come to me, watch for drift inside the loop I had built. I turned the job into a geometry problem with a watchful edge. Checklist, 23:56 local, 002 tablet. Beacon, on, record, blink cadence for 3 min, baseline. Total station. Tripod, at shelf 2, backsite resighted, compensator check. Okay, lidar tablet, stationary capture mode for contour stability test. ROI equals loop interior. Thermometer, point readings every 5 minute across stripe transect. Magnet plus feeler gauge, non-contact test. S27 cap, standoff versus post face. Radios, CH3 open, CH5 idle, CH2 record only, attenuator in line. First, a quiet truth I could pin. The brass-capped S27. I braced the soft brush against the cap's rim and felt a lip again. Metal proud of wood by more than age should allow. Magnet tugged with a neat confidence. The feeler gauge slid under the cap's front edge to 0.6 meters before wood said no. Under the night's patience, the numbers felt modest, which is why I trust them. Field note 00007, tablet, S27 cap stands, 0. 6 meter proud over shrunken post face, magnet adhesion high, saw check on post face shows modern cut, stamp remains 7/1, pencil S27 unchanged, surface dirt fingerprint visible left of S. The loop waited like a question I had written to myself. I clipped the tablet to the tripod at knee height at the loop's center and set a stationary capture, frame rate low, to keep noise from inventing a story. Contours began to sketch themselves in gray bands on the screen as the point cloud accumulated. The wash floor rose toward the knoll in proper half meters. I looked at the topo roll on the truck bed and traced the same shapes with my finger, matching each shoulder as if the hills needed reassurance. Smell, dust, and a ghost of ozone, as if a copy machine lived under the desert. The coolant sweetness stayed gone. Tactile oddity. When I pressed a palm to the stripe's edge and lifted it, the grit gathered and let go a half-second late, sticky the way cold glass can be in dry air. I walked a thermometer transect across the stripe. 20 sundug, 21 dug, 19 dug, at center, 21 dug, 20 sundug. Numbers as neat as a classroom. At the fourth step, the tablet hiccuped and annotated its own contour layer with a tag. Stability adjustment. On screen, 2 contour lines near the stripe picked themselves up and slid east by a few centimeters, then settled. The truck hadn't moved. The tripod feet sat in divots I had carved on purpose. I reset the capture and wrote the language memos, except. Observed microshifts and computed contour positions during stationary capture, magnitude 5 to 8 centimeter east, duration 3 so no coincident wind event. The beacon clicked off on even, a metronome that had decided to be polite. I logged 180 pulses at 1 second on, 1 second off. At pulse 181, it gave me 0.9, 1.1 like earlier. I caught myself counting under my breath and stopped. Superstition borrows ink if you let it. I moved to the knoll to run a backsight again. Focus ring, steady. Angle solution, steady. I took 3 readings and averaged them to be a better citizen of my own data. The basalt shoulder didn't nod this time. The nod lived elsewhere. Document insert, 0019 tablet, 0013 wrist. CH3, logistics to 9-7, aviation complete, notch cold. Me, copy notch cold, conducting stationary capture, no hazards. Logistics. A firm quiet protocol continues. Check in at 0100. Me. Roger. The DM ladder points along the wash, still drew their strict 10-meter march into the interior. I set flags on every other one to give the place handles and walk the perimeter again. The reflective tags, obedient to the knoll an hour ago, now shared their attention. Half faced the stripe's center, half the back sight. Wind at 01 key couldn't have persuaded nylon that way. I wrote it down without adjectives. Contour drift showed itself worst when I looked away. I'd leave the tablet sketching, walk 5 meters to retie a slack twine, and come back to find a half-meter line had migrated enough to make a gap where my pencil sketch on the topo roll said there shouldn't be one. The point cloud itself looked healthy. Tight returns, low noise. It was the interpolation layers that felt unfaithful, as if the surface wanted to be one shape when watched and another when ignored. I told the memo the version that could sit at a table. DEM behavior. Contour interpolation exhibits transient offsets. Eastward, 515 semi, not present in raw point cloud, occurring prox. To stripe and a long wash ladder. Persist 25S. Settle to baseline. No instrument error detected at shelf AB. Effect localized. A page turned in the wash again. One, then none. I checked the truck. The topo roll on the bed had crept a centimeter toward the bumper, though no wind had risen. Paper does that in the night, curls to the nearest roughness. Still, I pinned it with a clip because caution is cheaper than doubt. The radio test continued. With the attenuator inline, Channel 2's room tone lost volume but kept its dignity. When I stood exactly on the stripe, facing west-northwest, the tone acquired a shallow tremor at a fixed interval. Low, low, high, pause. I recorded 30 seconds at 3 different positions. Center of stripe, 2 meters north, 2 meters south, and marked my stance arrow in the notebook. The tremor was strongest on the stripe, and had the same spacing as the far north white blink I'd been logging since part 1 of this job. I do not write part, I write start of window, because contracts like that better. I wrote coincident periodicities and kept my my pencil light. I tried a map maker's cheat, overplot tonight's contours on the project's wall sheet outline from the trailer. You can't take the wall sheet, but you can remember proportions. The basin rim on my screen sat true. The interior lay as if a shallow tilt had developed northwest where none should be. The magnitude was at the edge of noise, enough to notice if you measure for a living. easy to ignore if you don't. I saved the overlay with a note. Provisional requires dawn ground truth. And the cool stripe disliked being crossed with intention. Walking casually over it felt like stepping through plastic curtains in a cold storeroom. Walking it with a tape line held tight made the tape go slack for a second, as if one end had forgotten the other. I took 3 pulls across the stripe, hands low to reduce catenary, and felt the same loose moment each time at midline. The numbers landed fine. My fingers did not trust them. At 0041, tablet, 0035, watch, the aviation to the east returned in a distant arc, and the valley answered with a thing I could not memo without turning the sentence into a metaphor. The beam stroked the stripe, and the stripe shivered. On channel 2, the room tone's tremor synced to the long bright. The handheld's recording timestamp jumped a second and kept going. It felt like being a witness to 2 clocks making a private deal. Moral pressure arrived in the form of my own request, pushing against the quiet protocol. I wanted to key channel 2 and ask a simple question into the hum. What is your origin? Questions have to buy their way onto tapes. I kept my thumb off the transmit and paid in paper instead, adding to the memo skeleton. Requests: permission to perform active sweep on CH2, low power tone burst, for reflection study within loop. Permission to extend loop by 10 millimeters west to test stationary drift boundary. Guidance on cataloging non-monument marks, e.g. rubbed nickel-sized circles. The beacon, which had decided earlier to behave, gave me a small dirty trick. 1 late pulse, then catch-up bat, then even. I looked away and didn't clock it. I am not training the beacon, only being trained by it. I broke the loop briefly to step the tape down the wash ladder 1 more interval beyond the refusal. The ground offered me 9.8, pretending to be 10. I planted a flag anyway and labeled it 10 plus 1, Valley's number. On the way back, my earlier flags felt different under my knuckles when I straightened them, cool through the glove in a way that did not belong to air temperature. The thermometer argued, still 20 sudigs. I trusted my hand, and I trusted the instrument, and let the conflict live between them for now. Document insert, 0059 tablet, 0053 watch, the CH3. 97, logistics, top of the hour check. Me, 97, loop intact, running stationary capture, stripe temp stable at 19, reporting minor interpolation drift. Logistics. Copy interpolation drift. Reminder, do not transmit on 2. Me. Affirm. The topo roll on the truck bed had shifted again under its clip, not by curl, but by translation. A clean slide of about a centimeter, east to west, ink aligned to nothing but the fact. I reset it and squared the corners with the bed's ribs. A drawn contour I'd shaded to help my eye no longer match the point cloud's latest line. The line had moved by a hair, steady enough to make the pencil look drunk. Contours that drift is a phrase I knew. I'd be forced to put in the subject line of a memo, and memos do not like poetry. I took one last look at the stripe with the lamp off, letting the starlight flatten it. A darkness narrower than my boot stood where the stripe crossed the wash, visible only when I didn't try to see it, like a smudge on the back of your eye that cooperates only at the corner. I reached to touch the dust at its edge and felt it make a decision under my fingertip. Soft, then firm, as if the ground had retreated and returned. The far north blink swung through 2 short, 1 long again. The room tone on 2 lifted in the long. The page in the wash turned and did not turn back. Behind me, on the truck, the sealed permit sleeve slid a fraction in the dash pocket and gave back its own small page sound, like Tyvek breathing. I held still and listened to the valley count a beat. I did not yet know how to write. The valley had begun to answer only when I boxed it in. So I built it another box and paid for the decision in paperwork later. If I couldn't extend west per logistics, I would build inward and around. 2 loops, nested, the first at shin height where it already sat, the second at knee, offset 0.5 meter, staked in alternating cadence so the flags wouldn't speak to each other the same way. A second perimeter without changing the boundary on a map. Compliance adjacent. Checklist, 0106 tablet, 01 swatch. Loop 1, shin, twine, A, flags at 10 mi, verified by tape. Loop 2, knee, twine, B, flags offset 5 ms relative to loop 1, verified by tape. Stakes, alternating fiberglass, reflective squares deliberately randomized. Radios, CH3 live, CH5 idle, CH2 record only, notch declared cold, instruments, total station shelf 2, tablet stationary, at loop center, compass declination, SEPA 12.7 digi, local, pocket barometer 29. 85 and steady. Control, 2 unconnected pendulums hung from tripod legs to detect micro-wind, coins on dental floss, crude, honest. The moment the second line took its own tension, the stripe reacted. The temperature pocket widened by a palm's width. My transect radid, 22, 21, 18.8 at center now. A modest change, but the kind of modest that makes a lifetime of memos. The coins under the tripod ticked each other with a tiny impatience. No wind on my cheek. Field note swenud, second perimeter erected, knee height, offset. Stripe temp decreases additional 0.2.3 digs, width increases 1.1.2 by footprint test. Coins pendulum lightly contact at irregular intervals, no bulk wind. DEM stationary capture flags, local stability update twice. Contour interpolation eastward shift 4 to 7 cm during updates. If the valley wanted to be measured, it also wanted a say in how. The reflective squares I had randomized began to choose. Not all at once, not theatrically, but with a drift. Their faces resolved, one by one, toward the knoll and, in the inner loop, toward the stripe's center. Nylon will rotate under tension. It does not prefer 2 different centers at 2 different heights without instruction. I made the radio into a ruler. On channel 2, receive only, I walked the gap between the loops in a slow circle, antenna vertical, then horizontal, logging ERRSSI and tone amplitude the way I'd log a grade. At due west, the room tone deepened by a fraction and picked up a modulation no wider than the tremor I'd caught before. Low, low, high, pause. When I passed north and let my boot heel kiss the inner loop line, the modulation answered with a softened mirror. Low, high, low, pause, as if I'd forced a reflection through a slit. I marked the arc segments on the top O roll, thin pencil crescents with hatch marks where the handheld did its ghost of a nod. Smell returned like a careful colleague knocking, a thin coolant sweetness when I paused exactly on the stripe with the antenna pointed east-northeast at shoulder height. Not wind-driven, it vanished when I lowered the antenna and returned when I raised it. Equipment is weather vane. I wrote coupled scent and underlined it once, embarrassed at the phrase and keeping it anyway. I took compass bearings along the ladder to settle my own nerves. The needle respected declination and then, at the 4th 10-meter step, leaned 3 degrees west and stayed there until I backed away exactly 2 meters, at which point it remembered geography. Metal in the soil can do that. Metal also leaves dirt that looks wrong when you scuff it. I scuffed. The powder came up clean and light, no iron red. I let the inference stay shy. Procedure as anchor, a quick height of instrument check on the total station, because sometimes the only way to tell whether the night is lying is to make sure you're not. Heights checked, compensator fine. When I shot the inner loops corner to corner, the distances behaved. When I shot center to corner across the stripe, the hundredths place wobbled again and then forced itself into a number, like a witness correcting how they think they should remember. Document insert, 0122 tablet, 0116 watch, CH3. Logistics to 9-7 status. Me, 9-7. Second perimeter erected within boundary. Stationary capture ongoing. Minor contour drift continues. Stripe temp now 18.8. No hazards. Logistics. Copy internal second line. Reminder, refrain from CH2 transmit. Aviation remains cold. Me. Affirm. Beacon steady. I kept a ledger for the beacon because the beacon had decided to become an instrument. For 3 minutes, it blinked 1-1. At minute 4, it slid 0.91.1. On the 5th, it reclaimed 1-1. I set the stopwatch and watched for a power sag in the inverter. None. Electrical steady. Mechanical fickle. I wrote, beacon cadence may entrain stripe response, and then disciplined my hand. Correlation is a kind of hospitality. It is not a guest list. I cross-hatched the topo roll where the inner loop sat and noticed the crosshatch creep a millimeter west under my palm. Paper on a truck bed will walk, but clip pressure makes it lazy. I clipped a second edge and drew a light pencil box around the crosshatch to give myself a reference. 10 minutes later, the crosshatch had shifted inside the pencil line without dragging the line. Not possible. I rubbed the paper to feel a fold I'd missed. The sheet lay flat. I took a photograph, anonymous mode again, and added paper migration artifact to a list of things I would delete if I slept. I tested the ground with the thing every field tech trusts more than instruments: repetition. Heel to toe across the stripe 10 times, eyes on the horizon. Each time the boot print edges crisped, then softened, as if the dust were accepting me and then reconsidering. On the 9th pass, I found a second print lightly overlaid mine, the size of my own boot, set half a number narrower, heel a centimeter deeper, as if a person who walked like me but carried a different day had stepped there. I do not include prints in reports unless they have a chain of custody. I erased the overlapping edge with the side of my glove. It erased cleanly. When I looked up, 2 reflective squares in the inner loop faced me now, not the stripe. I took the tablet off stationary, set it to sweep at chest height, and walked the inner loop's north side slowly, giving the lidar a chance to draw the knee-high twine as a crisp line. It did. Where the inner line crossed the wash, the point cloud made a thin seam of underreturns, like a stitched scar. The outer line, at the same crossing, looked normal. 2 heights, 2 different answers, same air. I tried a trick from river surveys: seed the air with something you can see move. I cracked a smoke pen just enough to thread a pale stream along the stripe. It ran flat for a foot, then climbed a hand's width and held there, as if an invisible sill lived an inch above the dust. Smoke does that around heat. This was cool by thermometer, cool by skin. I recorded 20 seconds of smoke line on the tablet's RGB camera, even though I had been taking no photogrammetry. This was documentary, not measurement, and my memo would make the distinction with the care of a person who likes their contracts renewed. Field note 139. Smoke pennant stripe shows laminar rise. Chalmol 12 centimeters above surface, sustained, no lateral drift. Inner loop only. Outer loop crossing exhibits normal dispersion. Radios, CH2 tone amplitude peaks at north-northwest when smoke holds, falls when smoke dissipates. The page-turn sound from the wash arrived in a new grammar: 3 short flutters, pause, 1 long, like a human flipping to the index and then closing the book. Channel 2's room tone swelled on the long. The far north white blink obligingly did 2 short, 1 long, not quite my new pattern, close enough to make a mind greedy. I asked logistics again the way a river asks stone by persistence. 97 request, permission to place passive reflector, Mylar strip, at wash center line, within boundary to test optical scatter. They breathed, or maybe that was the air between us. Approved, within existing loop. Note location. Copy, I said, and paid for the approval by writing tidier than I felt. I cut a strip from a survival blanket, thumbed it around the inner loop at the stripe, and set the headlamp to low. The Mylar made a barely there star. I killed the light. Starlight took over. The strip still winked, once, twice, then settled, as if something had found its angle and kept it. I set a tiny, strict experiment that would teach me something or make me erase it. Move the truck beacon from on to off for exactly 60 seconds while the tablet and radio recorded, then back on, noting any change in stripe temp, CH2 amplitude, contour drift frequency. I timed it on my watch because my watch still believed in me. Beacon off. The room tone on 2 softened by a thumbprint. Stripe temp rose by 0.1 degree and then settled. The tablet's stationary capture showed no contour stability adjustment. Beacon on. The room tone found its dignity again. The stripe cooled back to 18.8. The tablet flagged stability adjustment within 5 seconds. Contour sliding east by 6 Amir and settling. I wrote the sequence twice to make sure I had not merely wanted it. Moral pressure put both hands on my shoulders now. The quiet protocol on 2 had a purpose I was not paid to challenge. Still, data has its own gravity. I built a compromise. No transmit on 2, but a passive sweep with the handheld's attenuator and a short loop of coax coiled at the stripe to see if the room tone would answer its own reflection. I set the coil, stood back, and listened. The tone thickened a shade that might only be the hour. I logged it, no claim. Document insert 0157 tablet, 0151 watch. CH3, 97, top of hour. Me, 97, inner loop stable, beacon test produced minor correlated effects. Request guidance on extended stationary capture through window end. Logistics, approved, pack out at 0330. Me, Roger. I told the Valley I would respect that by writing it down. Start closing at 0330. No heroics. The topo roll, under both clips now, offered me a modest betrayal. A drawn half-meter line that should have nested inside its neighbor now overlapped it at a shallow angle, as if the paper had remembered a different valley. I placed a third clip. The line didn't move again. I allowed myself a breath. Then the S-27 rumor made a decision for me. At the brass-capped post, the chalk line I'd used to fill the stamp's letters lay where I'd left it, but the chalk dust around the rim had gathered into a crescent on the north side, the way filings collect near a magnet's pole. I hadn't brushed that way. I set the magnet to the cap again, adhesion unchanged. I ran the feeler gauge, 0.6 millimeters again. My pencil wrote, cap-oriented, and I disliked that sentence in my book. The coins under the tripod tapped each other twice. The smoke line rose and held. The Mylar strip winked without light to wink. I walked into the inner loop to reset a flag that had inclined itself toward the stripe. And as I did, the tablet chirped a low alert I hadn't heard from it all night. Buffer full on stationary capture. I reached to clear the buffer and watched the screen without thinking. The contour layer, as if tired of the long game, slid not a centimeter, but the width of my fingernail all at once and stayed, east toward the stripe, leaving a hairline gap between surface and belief. The page in the wash turned and did not stop. It flipped and flipped, as if a hand had forgotten to let go. Beyond the inner loop, in the ladder, a new dot appeared on the tablet. One more 10-meter step that I had not walked and had not taped, placed precisely where my pencil would have put it if the Valley had been taking dictation. I kept my hand off channel 2. I let the tablet keep its new dot as if it had earned a badge, and I hadn't. The inner loop held. The second line at knee height hummed in twine, the way tight nylon speaks in a breeze that wasn't there. Beacon steady per watch, per eye. Tablet telling me a minute I hadn't reached yet. I gave the Valley something small to refuse and watched for where it chose to say no. Checklist, EO203 tablet, 0157 watch. Stationary capture paused. DEM sweep mode resumed. Shoulder height. Pendulums, coins. Re-zeroed. Contact history marked. Stripe transect. Repeat every 10 min thermometer. Palm test. Radio. CH3 open. CH5 idle. CH2 record only with attenuator. Optical. Mylar strip intact. Smoke pen capped. Headlamp off unless needed. Paper. Topo roll triple clipped. Pencil boxed. New dot with exact timestamps. Both clocks. I started with the ladder's new step. If the place wanted to add 10 meters, I wanted to see what 10 meters meant tonight. Tape from the last known dot to the new one read 1000 true. Pace said 9 point something that pretended to be exact. I planted a stake at the tablet's coordinate and labeled the flag 10 plus 2, not walked. The reflective square on that flag faced the stripe immediately without waiting for a wind, the way iron filings choose a field. Field note 206. DEM ladder gained 1 additional point westward with operator traverse. Tape interval 10 on marsmem, pace undercounts by 3%. Flag at 10 plus 2 self-orients reflective side toward stripe. No measurable wind. Stripe temp 18.8 degree, width constant versus last check. Coins tap once during flag placement. The stars did their honest work above the notch, salt scattered over black. And then I noticed the Valley had borrowed some, not many, just enough to be a number. Along the wash center line, in the line of the ladder, several faint pricks of light persisted at ankle height, where there was no reflector, no dust in headlamp off, no source I could own. Starlight can glint on mica. It does not hold in a line at 10-meter cadence. I shaded my eyes and moved. The pricks moved with the geometry of parallax to a point, and then snapped back to the ladder like disciplined recruits. I recorded 30 seconds on the tablet's RGB for the memo's sake, knowing the video would show grain and doubt, and not the thing itself. I chose a test that would anger nothing but my future sleep. An occultation. I stood at the new dot and raised a palm between my eyes and the pricks. If they were tricks of line of sight off distant stars, my hand would eat them. They dimmed but did not disappear, as if they drew from a pool not quite mine. The tablet's exposure algorithm tried to help and then gave up. I wrote it as numbers anyway. Optical persistence at ground level, ladder cadence, not occluded fully by hand at 0.5 mm, diminishes with headlamp on, returns when off. Smell stayed honest. Dust? A cold plastic hint from the Mylar when the breeze? That wasn't, remembered it. Tactile. The grit at the stripe still rebounded under palm, half-second late. Sound. The page-turn grammar from the wash gave me a new clause. Long pause, as if a person had flipped past their own place and held still to listen whether they'd gone too far. Beacon experiment 2. Off-on with longer windows. Off for 3 minutes while I watched the stripe and the pricks. On for 3 to see if any cause would consent to be cause. Off. Room tone on 2 softened. Pricks held. Stripe warmed by 1/10 and narrowed by a fingernail. The DEM's contour layer did not throw a stability adjustment. On. Tone swelled by a breath. Stripe cooled back. Contours slid east by 7 cm and settled. Correlation repeated. I still wrote correlation only and boxed it. Document insert 0215 tablet 0209 watch. CH3 97 logistics confirm beacon status. Shindemian 97 conducting controlled off-on tests. Off window complete. Beacon on. Logistics. Copy beacon on. Limit tests to 2 more cycles. Me. Affirm. I needed a fixed thing to swear by, so I asked the basalt shoulder to testify again. Total station at shelf 2. Backsight checked. Focus ring steady. Readings landed within yesterday's decimals. The interior refused consistency. The rim obeyed. I drew that as 2 arrows. Outer, true, inner, drift, because pictures save a future argument. The stripe did something a surveyor should never be able to write. Under starlight alone, a soft penumbra walked along its length like breath seen in winter. Not vaporous, not a fog, just a preference in the dark. It moved from south to north in a time I could count. I did. 1 and 2 and arrived at the Mylar. The Mylar winked twice and then forgot. I dropped a prism on the new dot and shot it from the knoll. Distance solution took longer than it should, as if the instrument waited for permission. When it answered with a number that refused the sum of the earlier 2 steps by 3 centimeters. I shot again. The number decided to be obedient. The notebook records both, because the first number happened in the world, whether the second forgave it or not. Radio as ruler again. On channel 2, attenuated, I rotated the whip through quadrants and read the tone's amplitude. The peak had shifted by a handful of degrees west since my last sketch, aligned more with the new dot than with the old 4th step. I amended the topo roll with a new hatch, pencil barely touching paper to avoid pushing belief into graphite. The coin pendulums tapped each other once, a small clink out of cadence with any breeze. At 2:27, tablet, 0221, watch, the far north white blink did its 2 short, 1 long. Channel 2's room tone answered with low, low, high, pause. The high overgrew into a thin harmonic, then dropped. The tripod legs hummed the way aluminum does under a passing truck you do not see. No truck in any direction. I pressed my ear to the leg and heard my own blood, which is also a kind of testimony. I wanted data at scale. Stationary capture resumed within the inner loop. ROI tight on stripe and on the line from 10+1 to 10+2. The contour layer drew its polite bands. Then, at intervals that matched the far north blink plus a modest delay, bands near the stripe slid always east by 5 at 8 centimeters, holding for a count, returning. The DEM point cloud itself stayed honest. Interpolation argued with itself. I saved the capture and wrote a sentence useful in a conference room. Contour interpolation exhibits periodic eastward offsets temporally correlated with external optical cadence, unknown origin, without corresponding change in raw returns. Moral pressure thickened, the sense that I was an employee of 2 employers, the contract in my sleeve and the valley under my feet. I asked logistics for guidance I thought they would deny. 97 requesting authorization to bury a coin at stripe edge as a passive marker. Depth 1 centimeter, no disturbance of monuments. Silence that counted as an answer. Then, negative, no soil disturbance, photograph surface only. Copy, I said. It's a desert. It keeps what you put in it. So I staged a non-contact mark. I pressed a coin against dust at the stripe's margin until it took a clean circle. then lifted. The circle stayed dim, cooled a touch under thermometer, and then, when I turned away to re-level the tripod, shifted north by the width of a pencil line inside its own diameter, like a stamp that decides it prefers a slightly different sentence. I repressed the coin. The new circle overlapped the old like rings in a tree. I did not photograph that. I would describe it poorly and trust my handwriting to be less dramatic than my camera. Smell. The coolant returned when I oriented the handheld's antenna, west by northwest, and held still. Lowering the antenna erased the sweetness. Raising it returned the hint. The room tone on 2 strengthened in the same posture. My hand is not a spectrum analyzer, but it learns. Beacon test 3, last per logistics, off. The pricks of light at ankle height along the ladder dimmed by half and then held like embers. The inner loop's reflective squares, those that had been undecided, turned their faces to the stripe as if invited. On again. The pricks brightened back. The stripe cooled the tense it cared about. The contour layer slid half a thumb east and stayed longer this time, 10 seconds before returning, enough to make me look at the topo roll and reflex. On the roll, lines did not move. Paper, at last, decided to be paper. Document insert, 0244 tablet, 0238 watch. CH3, 97, logistics. 2 hours remaining. Me. 97, understood. Contour offsets persist. DEM ladder extended by 1 step. Radio tone stable with bearing shift. No hazards. Logistics. Copy. Pack down begins at 0330. Deliver memo with anomalies flagged. I drew my memo's headings to keep myself from writing the ending before I earned it. Methods, night window, instruments, loops. Results, legacy S27s, ladder growth, stripe, temp, optical radio, contour drift. Tests, beacon off on, stationary capture, occultation, smoke, non-contact mark. Requests, CH2 active sweep tomorrow, west expansion, guidance on optical cadence, permission to trace legacy bench network. The coins tapped once, then not at all. The page in the wash flipped, held, flipped back, and in the interval between those 2 motions, something changed in the way the stars thought about the valley. The pricks along the ladder brightened by a fraction that made them not brighter so much as more sure of themselves. I moved my hand again to eat them. They dimmed, not obedient to my hand, but as if they took note and chose to let me believe I had done it. I tried to walk into the place the new dot suggested, past my inner loop without crossing, diagonal through the legal interior as far west as the imaginary meter would allow. The tape played fair. My calves disagreed by 3%. At the limit, the handheld on 2 gave me the room tone plus that narrow modulation, and, for one thin second, that might be a mind-demanding pattern, a not voice in the gap between the low and the high, not a word. The shape of speech left on a blackboard after the chalk is taken away. I stood at the limit and let the valley count me. The far north blink performed 2 short, 1 long. The room tones high swelled polite as an usher. The beacon winked in the beat it had picked for the hour. Even, then late, then even. My pen hovered over the topo roll, borrowed stars, a long ladder, and before the words could sit, the tablet stamped a new dot on the DEM, 10 meters beyond 10+2, where no flag waited, exactly on cadence, exactly where my arm wanted to reach. I did not reach. The second perimeter twanged at knee height hard enough for the reflective squares to shiver. Behind me, from the truck cab, the sealed permit sleeve breathed loud enough to be a word. The next dot on the demon had planted itself like a suggestion I hadn't earned. My loops held, but the knee-height twine had adopted a faint hum I could feel more than hear, a vibration that didn't ride any wind I could measure. If the interior wanted to keep rewriting 10 meters at a time, I needed my control to answer back. The truck shelf, the packed patch that had stayed boring all night, was supposed to be my fixed page. I walked to it to see whether boredom still worked. Checklist: 0251 tablet, 0245 watch. Beacon, on. Cadence log restarted. Target Whitey pulses. Radios, CH3 open, CH5 idle, CH2 record only with attenuator inline, timestamps on both radios noted. Instruments, total station still at shelf 2, compensator bubble rechecked, tripod feet seated hard, tablet, DEM sweep paused, stationary capture to run at shelf for null baseline, control props, coin pendulums re-zeroed, Mylar unchanged, smoke pen sealed, paper, topo roll, triple clipped, pencil parked tip up, memo skeleton updated. The shelf looked like an honest piece of the world, boot-scuffed hardpan with a crescent of tire dust, the hazard triangles calm under the bumper. I set the tablet on the tripod at the shelf's center and let stationary capture build a point cloud of nothing. On screen, contours were flat and faithful. The raw returns behaved with the decency of a floor. Good. Baseline in a bottle. Then the shelf did a thing shelves don't. Channel 3, my safety net, dropped a bar and added a sliver of grit to the idle noise, as if the radio had swallowed a grain of the valley's dust. I toggled to 5 and back. Same. I walked 2 paces downslope from the bumper. The noise bar fell another tooth, and then stilled, not white noise empty, but the opposite. A silence with texture, like soundproof foam that remembers being a quarry. I stood still and realized my ears could hear the trees at the ridge and not me next to me, the way a room that is too quiet makes you listen to yourself badly. Field note 0258, shelf anomaly, CH3RSSI. Idle changes at shelf center stir, 1 to 2 bars. Subjective dampening of near sounds. Distant aviation residuals audible. Stationary capture at shelf flags no contour offsets. DEM returns nominal. Stripe temp unchanged checked, but subjective balance pocket at shelf approx. 3 Medea. I described silence like an adult. Attenuation of local acoustic cues. I still wrote silence in the margin because I am a person, not a spreadsheet. I ran a clap test. 2 measured claps at sternum height, 10 seconds apart, mic on the radio recording. On the shelf, the second clap sounded on the handheld's playback, as if I'd halved my hands. Off the shelf, 2 meters to the side, both claps returned with identical sharpness. I boxed it and underlined repeated hour. Smell thinned here too. The coolant sweetness I could conjure by canting the antenna west-northwest at the stripe refused to be smelled at the shelf, no matter how I pointed the whip. Ozone ghost from the Mylar didn't travel this far. Tactile oddities still lived. Dust on the shelf gave up my palm print instantly, but the grit rebounded at the edges as if drawn by a weak elastic. I made a low-risk compromise with orders. No CH2 transmit, but I could listen to whether the silence had tuned the valley differently. At the shelf center, the room tone flattened. The little tremor I'd chased all night ironed smooth. When I stepped 1 boot outside the coin pendulums, the tone reacquired a pulse that matched the far north blink's high after a delayed beat. I drew the shelf as a circle on the topo roll and shaded it with the lightest pencil I had, labeling it Quiet Lens. Document insert 0306 tablet 0303 watch. CH3. Logistics 297 status. Me. 97. Interior loops intact. Observing acoustic dampening at vehicle shelf. Radios functional. No hazards. Logistics. Copy. Keep shelf clear. No vehicle movement. Reminder. Pack out at 0330. Me. Affirm clear. No movement. If I couldn't move the truck, I could move around it. I hung a 3rd coin on a floss line under the bumper for symmetry and watched all 3. The shelf's coins never touched. The inner loop coins at the tripod tapped once every few minutes without wind. 2 systems, 2 tempers. I wanted to see whether the shelf's quiet lens talked to the interior geometry. I set the tablet to stationary capture, again at the shelf, and, simultaneously, set a second capture, ROI, at the stripe using the total station's onboard data port as a timing reference. Not synced equipment, just my best attempt at same time in a place with 2 clocks. On screen, the stripe's contour fringes twitched east by the same 5 to 8 centimeters at their usual polite tempo. The shelf's contours didn't twitch at all, but the shelf capture annotated itself with a note I hadn't seen before. Ambient update. No offsets. Just the tablet admitting it had experienced the world. Beacon pulses 160, held 1.01, 61 to 75 went 0.911, 7690 righted themselves. I wrote the series into the margin and circled it. Correlation with stripe offsets persisted. The stripe slid within 5 seconds after any cadence change. The shelf ignored all of this like a clerk who follows their own calendar. The DEM ladder laid down one more faint ankle star at the 10+3 position, 10 meters beyond the last tablet-made truth. No flag there, no tape, just the pricks resolving to a persistence. I did not walk to it. The second perimeter twine at knee thrummed once and then remembered to be a line. I checked the S27s because Legacy has the right to interrupt. The brass-capped post still read 7/1. The chalk dust now lay as two crescents, north and east, like a weak compass. The pencil S27 had acquired a faint oily bloom around the numbers from my earlier glove. The graphite still read clean. The magnet test at the cap pulled strong. The feeler gauge standoff held 0.6 mm. Tidy deceit, if deceit it was. I wrote no change and meant refuse to change the way I expected. I built a silent shelf experiment that wouldn't break anything. Put the handheld on channel 3 at the shelf center, set it to Vox at a high threshold, so only distinct sound would trigger recording and walk away. If the shelf ate quiet, it might fail to hear its own room. I left the unit on the bumper and set a second handheld, same settings, at the inner loop, facing the stripe. 10 minutes later, review. The loop radio recorded the page turns and my distant footsteps. The shelf radio had captured only the truck settling and a single faint click. At the same instant, the loop radio caught a page turn. I wrote the timestamp twice, both clocks, and drew a little bridge between the entries on paper. Time drift had stretched. Wrist, 0312, tablet, 0320, and change. 8 minutes now, all borrowed from someone else's day. My memo skeleton got a new line. Device time, skew grows linearly with window, or stepwise aligned to external cadence. Plot later. The topo roll, triple clipped, boxed, squared, had crept inside its pencil border again, west by 1 millimeter. I measured with a scale and my thumb, because I am old-fashioned, and because sometimes 1 millimeter is the price of trying to write the night down. I photographed the sheet on the truck bed with a corner of the bumper and frame to anchor truth, and then scolded myself for giving a camera a job paper does better. I needed one last control before pack down, instrument pointing behavior at the shelf when the interior twitched. I slewed the total station to the basalt shoulder and watched focus like a hawk. When the stripe's contour layer slid east by its 6/7 smear, the focus ring at the shelf did not hunt, but the reticle's internal illumination dimmed by a breath. Not a power issue. Battery at 84%, inverter steady. I pressed my eye into rubbers and looked harder. The shoulder stayed crisp. The instrument had only blinked. Tools are allowed to blink. I logged the dim as a transient HUD intensity drop. The language made the oddity sit up straighter. Document insert, 0319 tablet, 0311 watch, CH3, 97, logistics, begin pack down in 10. Me, 97, copy 10, completing stationary capture, removing inner flags last, beacon to remain on until wheels rolling. Logistics, affirm. The valley waited for the obedience to start, as if it had read the same memo. At the inner loop, the reflective squares that had been indecisive turned in a little unison, not snapping, not a trick of wind, just facing the stripe the way a class faces the chalkboard when an old teacher clears a throat. The coin pendulums under the inner tripod tapped once, then stilled. The page in the wash didn't turn. That was worse. I broke down clean. Prism off first. Tripod legs free with 2 hands. Flags in a bundle. Twine wound without tangles so morning won't hate me. I left the outer loop standing per my own tradition until last. The first line drawn is the last erased. At the shelf I coiled cables with my usual habit. Elbow, turn, and noticed the silence pressed closer. When I set a coil down, it made less noise hitting the bed than the coil before it, like the shelf had learned the trick of keeping sounds. Beacon pulses 151 to 162 ran 0.9, 1.1 again. The stripe cooled from 18.8 to 18.6 without meteorology. Channel 2's room tone swelled a shade, and then made room for a shape that wasn't speech. I stood still at the shelf edge and let my hands be quiet on purpose. Last task. Write the final line of the memo skeleton so I couldn't talk myself out of it later. Summary line, draft. Interior displays repeatable spatial temporal anomalies, radio tone bearing, optical points, contour, interpolation, offsets, temperature stripe, modulated by beacon cadence. Shelf exhibits localized acoustic attenuation and radio quieting without corresponding geomatic change. Legacy S27s present with inconsistent provenance. Recommend controlled sweep on CH2, low power, next window, westward extension by 20 mm, and Dawn ground truth of ladder with independent tape team. I slid the memo draft under the sealed permit in the Tyvek, as if the sleeve could make it respectable. The permit breathed and made the small page sound that had become a punctuation mark for this night. I turned toward the loops for the last time. The inner line had sagged a finger's width at the wash, knee rope giving up tension without any stake pulling out. I reached to tighten it, and the tablet, still at the shelf on stationary capture, stamped a new dot in the DEM ladder, 10 plus 4, exactly where my pencil would have placed it if someone had asked me what 10 meters means. No flag there, no walk. Just a decision the valley made while I held a rope. Channel 3 hissed a half-breath, then returned to proper quiet. Channel 2's room tone rose into its high and held longer than it had all night. The topo roll, triple-clipped, didn't move. The shelf held its silence like water chosen by a stone. Logistics, 9-7, confirm wheels in 5. Wheels in 5, I said, and put my hand on the shin-high twine to pull the knot. The knot had been retied while I stood there, my own knot, mirrored, tied clean and firm with the short end tucked, the way I tuck it when I'm thinking about tomorrow. Pack down is ritual, reverse the build, note the exceptions, tell the next hour what the last hour learned. I had 4 minutes, then 3, then 2 by my watch. The tablet had already spent those minutes on my behalf. The inner loop sag I'd reached for still wore a knot that wasn't the one my hand remembered. Same tuck, same economy, but mirrored as if a left-handed version of me had tied it while I watched the breath leave my glove. I made myself slow. Slow makes fewer ghosts. Checklist, ZO326 tablet, ZO318 watch. Beacon, on, cadence log continues. Radios, CH3 open, CH5 idle, CH2 record only. Attenuator in line. Instruments, total station at shelf 2. Stationary capture, shelf. Paused. DEM sweep, interior, resumed. Flags, inner loop to come down last. Outer loop remains for safety perimeter. S27s. Photograph final state, cap magnet feeler, confirm. Paper, memo draft sealed. Topo roll, triple clipped. Pencil boxed. 10 plus 4, unwalked. I set the total station for one last traverse to put a bow on the night. Knoll to basalt shoulder, crisp. Knoll to the prism I'd left at 10 plus 2. Crisp, then hesitant, then crisp again, like a student deciding a number is right after consulting the back of the book. I slewed to 10 plus 3, the tablet's dot without a flag, and took a dry read through open air. The instrument refused the distance but painted me a faint return in the scope, a glimmer the way heat haze grows skeletons. I logged non-range optical hint, no EDM solution, closed the site, and wrote it on paper in block capitals so I wouldn't mistake it later for poetry. The page turn sound from the wash had learned a new grammar. One long, then a short, then another long, staccato sympathy with the white blink to the north, which stayed stubborn in its too short, one long. Channel 2's room tone answered with its low, low, high cadence, and then, just once, returned the high twice, a matched pair like bookends. Twin returns, I thought, and wrote double high coincident with CH2 amplitude peak, duration 0.6s. The DEM sweep brought its own twins. As the tablet painted the ladder westward, faint ankle stars appeared not only at 10 plus 4, but, impossible without me, at 10 mid 1 behind the place I had started the night's line, back toward the wash head, exactly 10 meters up valley from my first step. No flag there. I checked my notes for an old marker I'd missed. None. The tablet gave the dot and its partner the same soft insistence. Ladder growing both ways, twin returns in space. I took that as a dare to be boring and went to the S27s. Brass cap, 7/1, chalk dust crescent now mirrored, north and south, neat as a compass rose. Pencil, S27, graphite unbroken, but someone had rubbed the surface with a cleaner glove than mine. The smudge I'd left was smeared thin and even, like a proof corrected with care. Feeler gauge under cap, 0.6 mig, magnet, firm. I wrote, no change, visually altered chalk distribution, not touched by me. Moral pressure, logistics had asked for wheels. Method, the valley had asked for one more line. I split the difference by building one last paired test I could run in 90 seconds. Twin instruments, twin recordings. Test, 2 handhelds recording simultaneously, one at the shelf quiet lens, one mid-stripe, both on CH2 receive only, same chintisi, same mic cover, same schema mindis, ibabawos booster, same attenuator. 2 tablets, mine in dim sweep at the interior, truck dash cam, the cheap, permitted kind, running at the shelf to give me optical timing on the beacon pulses. I started both radios by the watch, clapped once by the stripe to give me a crude air mark, and let the valley do the rest. Document insert, 0322 tablet, 0314 watch. CH3, 97, confirm wheels in 3. Me, 97, copy 3, running final dual record. Logistics, make it 2. Me, affirm 2. I stepped into the inner loop to pull the knee-height twine free of the mirrored knot, and found the knot had retied itself again. No drama, no tightening noise. It simply existed. Clean, my work's twin. I cut the twine instead of unknotting it, and told the memo the version that passes review. Inner line removed for transport. The coins under the tripod at the stripe tapped each other once, then again in immediate reply from the shelf coins. A little call and response that had never happened before. On the DEM, the contour layer performed its familiar slide, east by 6/7 sim, and a second later the shelf capture, I had restarted it against the minute, annotated ambient update in a matched pair of notes. 2 pop-ups, 2 dismissals. Twins in time. I pulled 2 flags from the inner loop at opposite corners, northwest and southeast, to keep myself symmetrical on paper. Both reflective squares rotated to face the stripe while I held their staffs in midair. I am not given to dramatics. I wrote the motion down with the dullest verbs I have. Beacon pulses, 1.0, 1.0, then 0.9 to 1.1, then back. The stripe temp stayed at 18.6, thermometer honest. The smell of coolant returned only when the handheld at the stripe pointed west-northwest, and the shelf unit did not agree. Twin radios, 1 nose. I closed the DEM sweep and, because I owed the night one more square, set the tablet to a very slow stationary capture centered on the line between 10+2 and 10+3. Points accumulated. Contours behaved for a count of 20. Then 2 lines moved together, east, then a hair more east, holding the offset longer than any prior slide. When they returned, they did it in 2 steps, as if the surface itself had learned the word again. The page in the wash turned once, then its own echo turned, a polite imitation a half beat later. I boxed it. Turn plus twin turn, lag 0.5s. I stood in the rectangle of my loop's absence and felt the cool stripe as a shadow without light, a thing found by skin and by math. I gave the total station one last job. Shoot a quick pair, cap S27 and pencil S27, in alternating sequence without moving the instrument, only pivoting. Cap, angle, distance, steady. Pencil, angle steady, distance, solution brief, wobble, hidi, reticle, dim a breath. Cap again, steady, pencil again, wobble, dim. Twins as answer, legacy solid, rumor jitter. Write that in a way a project manager will not regret reading. Cap monument provides repeatable solution. Uncapped marker exhibits transient EDM instability. No environmental change. Wheels, logistics said, the kind of voice that respects the work and ends it. Wheels, I said. I shut down the tablet, snapped the lid on the total station case, and reached for the topo roll to slide it back into the tube. The roll resisted, clip tight, paper obedient. And then the pencil line I'd boxed around my crosshatch filled itself with a second line. Faint, parallel, drawn by no hand I owned. The graphite sheen matched my own, not darker, not lighter. Twin line within the line. I do not truck importance. I put the roll in its tube, tapped the cap on, and stowed it under the seat. I left the outer loop for last and walked to the wash to pull the shin-high twine. The latter's ankle stars, 10, 10+1, 10+2, 10+3, 10+4, held like a patient constellation. Up valley at 10-1, the new prick stayed 2. I knelt to pull the first stake and froze because my glove rested on a second glove print in the dust, laid over my old print with a neat offset. Same size, same tread, a centimeter deeper at the heel. The dust edge lifted and fell a half-second late. I swept the print with the side of my glove to erase evidence I could not steward. The dust smoothed obediently, then drew itself a twin ridge along the erased edge, a little echo of the line I had made. I took one step back to be a better adult than the hour wanted me to be. Channel 2's room tone rose into its high and this time stayed there long enough to become a plateau. The beacon metronome chose 0.9 to 1.1 for 8 beats in a row, then corrected. The coin pendulums under the bumper stayed still. The stripe pair kissed and parted, kissed and parted. Document insert, 0330 tablet, 0322 watch. CH3, 97, wheels now. Me, 97, wheels. Beacon will remain on until gate. Logistics, copy, gate 4 en route. I climbed into the truck. The cab smelled like Tyvek and electrically cold plastic. The sealed permit sleeve lay in the dash pocket with the memo draft under it. The sleeve breathed once, loud in the cab's new silence, and settled. I released the brake and let the truck roll a foot to feel the shelf give up my tires. The quiet lens broke like a bubble. You don't hear a pop. You hear the world return to its size. In the rear view, the inner loop lay coiled at my feet. The outer loop still marked the absence of a square around the stripe. The Mylar winked once, twice, then, without wind, without headlamp, winked a third time in the beat the white blink to the north uses for its long. I put the truck in gear. The total station case slid a centimeter on the rubber mat and then slid a second centimeter without help. Twin motions with a pause that felt like a decision. I set my palm on it to stop the second slide and let the engine idle into the valley's fact. The handheld at the shelf had recorded its Vox silence. The handheld at the stripe had captured a noise the software would call tone, and I would later call a pair of answers to a question I hadn't asked. The tablet, powered down, still held on its black screen the ghost of its last display the way some screens do. A faint map burned into a moment. Where the ladder ended at 10+4, another dot ghosted at the margin, 10 meters farther, not committed to pixels, just the afterimage of a decision a place had not yet sent to the part of the world that keeps time. I eased the truck off the shelf. Gravel under the tires made the sound it always makes. The beacon washed the cab in amber, late by a breath, then catching up fast, then becoming even again, as if I had matched the valley's pace or it had matched mine. At the edge of headlight reach, the outer loop twine lifted and settled twice without hands, like a person nodding to a person in a different truck. I drove toward gate 4 with 2 clocks and a draft I could not show anyone the way I wanted to. In the mirror, the wash showed me one more page turn and, half a second later, its twin. Gate 4 read my plates without greeting and let me pass by being less than a place. Lamp, bar, clipboards. I parked where the trailer made its own weather and shut the beacon only when the guard raised 2 fingers, which counts as permission in a lot like this. The cab gave back the brittle smell of cooled plastic and Tyvek. When I pulled the sealed permit sleeve from the dash pocket, the memo draft wrote obedient under it, my handwriting steadier than my pulse had been. I signed the log at the door in a column marked Window End 0330-0342, my watch, not the tablet, and let the trailer swallow me with its determined air. Project waited with a pen in the development smile people wear when they believe in both the job and the thing the job sits on. Anything that changes tomorrow's plan? She asked, which is how you say, tell me the part that buys risk. Contour interpolation drift proximate to a cool stripe on the wash, I said. Beacon cadence correlates. CH2 remains quiet by order. Receive only tone with bearing. Ladder of point-like returns, added steps without traverse. Shelf near truck exhibits acoustic attenuation. I kept my voice purposely dull. I am paid to be dull that remembers everything. She wrote only drift proc stripe, shelf quiet, and underlined the word quiet twice. Memo? She asked. Skeleton in the sleeve, I said. Dem files and station shots on the SSD, tablet time skewed forward by 8 minutes at window end. Wrist stayed true to WWV. We expected a skew, she said, which is how you say, we've seen something but won't write it in a trailer with an AC set to meeting. Tomorrow we'll give you a second tablet with a locked datum. No GNSS write access on your end. We want to see whose minutes are whose. Understood, I said. Locked datum means a clock that won't negotiate. I took the corner table by the charging strip and started the ritual that makes a map outlive a night. SSD in dock. LiDAR dumps into folder V9 Carto YMMDD. LAS to E57 with checksums. Point cloud viewer up in a window. Yesterday's rim for context, and tonight's bowl layered on top. The wash drew clean. The contours sneaked their eastward increments along the stripe on playback exactly where I'd seen them in the dark. Good. The machine remembered its own sins. Procedure kept me honest. Post window log. 0358 watch. 0406 tablet recovered. Imported DEM sweeps, IDs, 117 to 142, stationary captures, IDs 143 to 154, stripe ROI flagged. Exported Renex from base GNSS, CHR, Gate 4, and Rover, tablet, for sanity. No PPK tonight per rules, keeping for record. Synchronized audio from CH3 and CH2 handhelds, stripe versus shelf. Stripe unit VOX triggered at page turn events. Shelf unit quiet, except for single coincident click at 031214. Watch. Annotated beacon cadence deviations from dashcam visual with frame numbers. Cross correlation with contour, stability adjustments, shows 0.62 to 0.68 s lag. I wrote lag with relief. Numbers like lags keep superstition sedated. The topo roll came out of its tube to sit beside the keyboard. Under the trailer's fluorescent, the graphite sheen flattened enough to be believed. The little pencil box I'd drawn around the crosshatch at the shelf, my guardrail, held two parallel lines still, twin lines nested without smudge. The ladder marks, 10, 10 plus 1, 10 plus 2, 10 plus 3, 10 plus 4, sat where I'd put them. Up valley, at 10-1, my own penciled circle had not existed until I lifted the roll now and found a faint ring already there. Same softness as the others, not my hand's pressure. I pressed the pad of my thumb against the paper to feel whether the indent told me who held the pencil. Paper refuses to testify. The audio files gave up their own ledger. On CH2, shelf versus a stripe, the tones high arrived as twins twice in the window I'd boxed as twin returns, separated by 0.58 s, first occurrence, and 0.61, second. At the same instance, the dashcam's beacon video showed the 0.9 1.1 late early pair. The tablet's stationary capture flagged stability adjustment twice, eastward, then more east. The shelf capture wrote ambient update twice with no contour movement. I stacked the plots and made the trailer's AC feel like a colleague. Coffee? Project asked behind me as if it were part of the workflow spec. Yes, I said, because coffee turns superstition into vocabulary. She handed me the cup, watched the two plots align, and made the face of a person who is good at not speaking. Gate 4 recorded your wheels, she said instead, 2 minutes early by their clock. You were 8 minutes late by yours. Tomorrow we'll align time codes and see who apologizes. I'll bring both watches, I said, and left it at that. Smell. The trailer had only paper and burnt coffee and recirculated cold. My jacket carried dust and that thin coolant sweetness even now. I hung it on the chair back so I didn't edit the room by wearing a valley. I built a ledger page in the notebook so that I would not pretend to memory in a month. Ledger of dust. Stripe. 18.6 to 18.8 dirks, width 0.4 0.5 mem. Laminar smoke rise, 12 cm cool rebound after beacon on events. Ladder. DEM points at 10 meter intervals added 10 plus 2, 10 plus 3, 10 plus 4, spontaneous 10-1 up valley on tablet end. Optical ankle pricks persist under starlight, partial hand occlusion only. S27, cap 7/1, 0.6 mm standoff, chalk crescents shifted cardinal, pencil post clean but provenance inconsistent. EDM wobble on pencil post only. AS radios, CH3 nominal, wire shelf attenuation, CH2 receive only tone, low, low, high, with twin highs coincident to beacon cadence deviations. Stripe acts as oriented antenna. Shelf, quiet lens, radius 3 mem. Shelf, acoustic dampening, clap test attenuation on second clap, tablet captured, ambient updates, WO DEM offsets, coins under tripod never touched, bumper coin tapped once in sync with stripe coins. Project leaned toward the topo roll and read the part of my handwriting that isn't for other people. Ledger, she said, your word? It's what dust does when it keeps score, I said. She nodded. We'll lock datum tomorrow. You'll get a second total station too. Same model, different calibration, cert. We want to see if the wobble lives in the head or the place, and a second truck beacon on a portable mast. We'll run it with an uncorrelated cadence. To 2 beacons, I said, and underlined 2 in my book. Twin returns in hardware now, not just in sound. I scrubbed through the dashcam frames to the one where the topo roll had drawn itself a twin line inside the pencil box. The camera had the roll edge in frame at 03:16:07, watch overlay. No hand moved there, just the clip and the paper. The second line existed in frame 03:16:08, no pen in hand, no twitch in the sheet. The video would look like a compression artifact to anyone who had not stood under the AC humming and tried to give grammar to a night. I wrote artifact in the margin and drew an arrow to not explainable without a noun we don't have. When I popped the SSD to carry it to the secure drive, a small drift of wash dust leaped from the case seam and settled on the trailer's gray tabletop in a rectangle I could measure, 10 centimeters by something that wanted to be more. I didn't breathe. I watched the grains stop. The AC would blow them if air moved. Air did not. I laid the scale down along the rectangle's long axis and found, without wanting it, exactly 10 centimeters repeated. A little ladder in dust, 5 rungs. I brushed it into a bag labeled table dust and hated myself for enjoying the label. The guard from the shack brought in a form and did not look at the map. This is their skill. Sign here for equipment chain, he said. I signed my contractor number and the time, my watch time, and he signed his name that isn't his name and wrote a time 2 minutes different on his sheet that isn't mine. Twin entries, offset, and everyone proud of their lines. The hour between is 4:20 and sleep is where memos become prosecutions if you let them. I kept my words inside fences. Memo, draft, subject, V9 Carto Night 1, stripe drift, radio notes, summary. Within boundary, repeatable spatial temporal anomalies observed prox. To linear cool zone, stripe, across wash center line. DEM contour interpolation shows periodic eastward offsets, 5/8 centimeter, temporally correlated with beacon cadence deviations, lag 0.65 SDR. Ladder of point returns, 10 beach cadence, grew at both interior and up valley bounds without traverse. CH2, receive only, exhibits narrowband tone where bearing. Twin high events coincide with contour offsets and beacon deviations. Vehicle shelf exhibits localized acoustic attenuation, no DEM drift at shelf. Legacy benchmark. S27, capped, stable. Uncapped pencil mark exhibits EDM instability. Recommendations: locked datum tablet for time isolation, second beacon with uncorrelated cadence, duplicate total station, passive reflector protocol, request limited CH2 active sweep, low power during next window, request westward extension by 20 bin. So I printed it to the secure bin and sealed the hard copy into the same Tyvek sleeve as the permit, per their habit of keeping vows together. The sleeve breathed. On the way to the cots, a maintenance tech intercepted me with a handheld wrapped in plastic. Your spare radio, he said, firmware pushed. Shelf forgot itself for 5 minutes last week, for a different team. Forgot? I asked. He shrugged. The way a room forgets a noise. They call it the lens. Your word works. I call it quiet, I said, and didn't make it a theory. Sleep in the trailer tasted like aluminum and stale. I do not dream on jobs, I sort. The coin pendulums ticked in my head. Beacon late then, early then even. 2 clocks, 2 lines, 2 highs, twin returns. Somewhere outside the AC square weather, Gate 4 learned my next hour and wrote it down. I woke before the alarm because the sleeve at my elbow made its Tyvek page sound like a person turning to the last sheet. Dawn had not arrived. The tablet's black screen on the counter held the ghost of its last view. The ladder dot at 10+4 and a faint afterimage farther yet. I stood and watched without waking it. The ghost of a dot is not a dot. The dot you haven't walked is the sort of thing that waits until the window opens again. Project's voice from the doorway had the coffee in it already. Briefing at 1800, she said. Locked datum, twin beacons, duplicate head. We'll pin your stripe and see who moves first. Who, I said, not what. And she didn't correct me. On the edge of the counter, the bag of table dust showed the little ladder through clear plastic. In the bottom, a second set of 5 rungs had settled against the first, a twin offset by a grain. The briefing smelled like dry coffee and printer fuser. Project stood beside a whiteboard with 3 bullets and no adjectives. Locked datum tablet, duplicate head, twin beacons, uncoupled. She tapped each word with the capped pen as if to make sure time itself could hear. Window 1940 to 0340, she said. Second tablet runs a locked clock. No GNSS write, no operator override. If drift appears, we'll know which minute belongs to whom. Second total station, fresh cert. We'll shoot AB at the shelf and at the stripe. 2 truck beacons, yours on the cab, ours on a portable mast 20 meters behind the shelf. Run out of phase cadence. A equal 1.0, 1.0, B equals 0.85115. No CH2 transmit. Westward extension inside last night's boundary approved by 5 meters only. Copy, I said. 5 buys a line. Buy 2 if you can, she said. Call at the top of each hour. If you hear anything on 3 that you don't like, say spike and we'll scrub. Outside, the heat quit the day without apology. Gate 4 let my plates through by pretending not to see me. I parked on the shelf in the same rectangle of hardpan until muscle memory could sigh. The valley sat black and anvil still. The notch held its blank. Checklist, 1945 locked, a 1937 wrist. Sys beacon A, cab, on 1.01. 0, beacon B, mast, on 0.851. 15, cadences logged separately. Radios, CH3 open, CH5 idle, CH2 record only, attenuator inline, VOX disabled. Instruments, total station 1, yesterday's head, at shelf 2, total station 2, duplicate head, at stripe 1, compensators checked, prisms leveled. Tablets, tablet G GNSS, free, tablet L, locked, no GNSS. Fixed clock. Both batteries, 90%. Loops, outer shin height rebuilt along prior stakes, inner knee height deferred, 5 mm westward, micro extension flagged, control, coin pendulums fresh, Mylar strip intact, smoke pen sealed, topo roll boxed. I started with the shelf A-B test to take the instrument question out of the night. Total station 1 shot the basalt shoulder. Total station 2 shot the same. Angles landed within a whisper. Distances sat down like tired numbers. Then we carried station 2 into the wash, set it at stripe 1, and let it breathe. The scope found my reflective tape. Distance solution on the stripe crossing, wobble in hundredths, repeat, average. Station 1 at the shelf duplicated last night's faithfulness. That gave me permission to loan suspicion back to the ground. Tablet G reacquired its sky, submeter promise, 4 constellations, dilution low. Tablet L refused to ask the sky anything. Its clock read 1945, and would do so until tomorrow if I let it. I strapped them both, G to my chest for sweep, L to a tripod at the loop center for stationary capture, and told myself the words I use when I want to be brave and dull. Control, compare, confess. Logistics 9-7, I said on 3. Twin beacons live, station 1 shelf, station 2 stripe, tablet G sweep, tablet L stationary, beginning passes. Copy, they said. No special traffic. Aviation cold. The stripe read 19. Sizdegi on first transect. Cooler than last night by a hair. The dirt still rebounded under palm late by half a second. A lesson it hadn't unlearned. I laid the fiberglass tape along the wash ladder and found my 10 meters ready to be true. The ankle pricks, the faint, persistent starlight points, showed at 10, 10 plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, and up valley at 1. 10 little obediences to a law I hadn't found. Beacon A pulsed even. Beacon B made its odd pair. I wrote their cadences as heartbeat and hiccup. 2 minutes later, tablet G flagged stability adjustment at the stripe. Eastward, 6 to 7 cm, the now familiar slide. Tablet L, 2 meters away, writing time that would never pass, stamped a note I hadn't seen. Frame hold. No contour slide rendered. A locked minute had chosen to refuse mischief or to keep it in a room I couldn't enter. I boxed that and kept my pencil surprised but neat. Field note 1958. LG, tablet G, GNSS. Contour offsets 5 into 8 cm E, correlated to beacon cadence mix lag issue 0.6s. Tablet L, lock. NUS contour offsets. Frame hold, annotations at same lag windows. Raw, point density constant. Interpretation. Interpolation drift tethered to time base, or to device alignment with cadence source. Needs A-B swap, so I swapped jobs. Tablet L on sweep at chest. Tablet G on stationary capture at loop center. The valley answered the swap by being the valley. Tablet L's sweep painted a wash that did not slide. Tablet G's stationary capture performed the two-step east. I underlined the did not slide until the pencil dented the paper. If locked time forbade drift, then the thing that drifted had needed a permission the GNSS clock had given it. The radio on 2 stayed with its low, low, high. Beacon B's late early pair made the high grow a second harmonic, like a light thread above a heavier one. Facing west-northwest at the stripe, the amplitude peaked. At the shelf, it flattened. The quiet lens still owned the space under the bumper. My clap sounded smaller there again. I ran one clap at the shelf, one at the stripe, not for the memo, just to keep my hands in the ritual that steadies nerve. At 2012, locked, 2004, wrist, the far north white blink kept its 2 short, 1 long. Channel 2's room tone answered with the usual cadence, but at a phase I hadn't seen. The high drifted until it wanted to sit between A and B, not on either. I drew 2 small saw teeth in the margin and sketched the high parked halfway like a bead. Beacon test, now with twins. A off for 90 seconds while B stayed on, then swap. A off, B on. Tablet G's contour slide reduced to 2 to 3 cm. Tablet L drew no slide, but stamped frame hold. B off, A on. Slide returned to 6-7 centimeters. Tablet L again, frame hold. Correlation picked a favorite, Beacon A. I wrote it 3 times and then wrote it once in the place I would be forced to read later. Document insert, 2020 locked, 2012 wrist. CH3, 97, logistics, how's the locked? Me, locked forbids interpolation drift. GNSS still slides on, a cadence, B less effective, shelf quiet lens persists. A logistics, copy, maintain, A on, B run, 851. 15. Do not try synchronization. Do not try synchronization is the kind of sentence that makes a contractor test his patience instead of his hands. I left B out of phase and walked to the new 5-meter west allowance like a contraband gift. At 10 plus 4 plus 5, the sweep hinted at a faint ankle star and then refused to resolve. The knee twine, rebuilt at the inner loop, found tension easily. I set a single flag at the new limit and labeled it 10 plus 4, permitted. A smell, the coolant sweetness when the handheld whip pointed west by northwest at shoulder height, nowhere else. Tactile, striped dirt still elastic under palm. Shelf dust prints sharp and obedient. Sound, page turn grammar returned to 1 long, short, long, as if the book and the index had made a truce. S27 check, because legacy can interrupt any night. The cap still proud by 0.6 millimeter, 7/1. Chalk crescents now quartered, N, E, S, W, no brush since morning. Pencil S27 showed the EDM wobble again, while Station 2 shot it. Station 1 at the shelf didn't notice. Tablet L pointed at the pencil post as if it were old oak. Tablet G thought about it. Frame hold, stamped on L at the same cadence as A's pulses. I set a bigger A-B test that would cost me 8 minutes and pay for itself in a paragraph. Both tablets stationary, same ROI on stripe, both total stations measuring the stripe crossing. Beacon A steady 1.01. Mural for 4 minutes, then A off and B only for 4. During a on, G slid east, L flagged frame hold. Both stations returned distance wobble at the hundredths and then averaged clean. During a off B on, G slid less, 2-3 cm, L flagged frame hold. Stations steadied. I wrote it, boxed it, and underlined A as the suspect I could describe without courage. Then the valley answered a question I hadn't asked. The ankle stars along the ladder brightened by a breath when A pulsed and dimmed when A did not. B made no difference. I ran the headlamp at low, and the stars consented to be eaten by light, but only on the beat of A's on. Off, they returned between ticks like somebody flipping a switch nobody admits to wiring. Field note 2041, locked. Ankle optical points modulate with beacon and cadence. Tablet G contour offsets temporally correlate. Tablet L holds frame. CH2 high grows faint harmonic on a pulse. Shelf remains acoustically attenuated. Hypothesis. A acts as a metronome for interpolation layer. Locked time declines to dance. At the top of the hour, logistics did their check, and I did mine. Request, I said. and heard my own voice already paying for it. Permission to run beacon A phase shift by 10% for 60 seconds, while LG stationary captures run. B unchanged. Silence organized itself. Approved, they said. 1 cycle, no transmit on 2. I stepped to the mast controller, moved A's pulse ratio from 1.0 to 0.9 1.1, and counted heartbeats to keep from wanting a chimney to watch. Tablet G's contour layer slid and held longer, 10 seconds, before returning. Tablet L flashed frame hold twice, as if it were a person clearing a throat. CH2's high climbed, and the harmonic above it found a second harmonic, thin as a wire drawn too long. The ankle stars brightened and then steadied, as if I had oversalted a recipe and the soup had forgiven me. I put A back to 1.0 and logged the shame of learning something useful I wasn't supposed to touch. Then I did the thing I had planned for my own conscience. Swapped tablets again to see whether personality lived in hardware or in minutes. L on sweep, G on stationary. The valley, polite, answered the same way. L refused to slide, G obliged. Beacon B, indifferent little brother, chirped its offbeat cadence. I tried not to imagine what synchronization would do, and wrote, "not attempted" in caps, so I would not become the author of my own error report. The shelf had kept its quiet through all of this. I walked back to it to set the radios for another twin record, stripe versus shelf. Both CH2 receive only, then paused because the coin pendulums under the bumper were doing something coins don't. The outer two had matched length in a single plane, ticking in perfect antiphase, while the inner coin, added tonight, hung dead still, as if the air had been subtracted from around it. I listened to the bumper like a doctor and heard only my own dumb blood. At 21:03, locked, a 20:55, wrist, the far north blink shifted a hair right relative to the notch rim, a pilot's solution to nothing, or a change in where the world keeps stars. CH2's high answered on the same beat. Beacon A's on matched it. Tablet G slid. Tablet L held. Station 2 at the stripe reported a transient HUD intensity drop. I wrote the hour like a ledger and stopped my hand from circling anything twice. I tasked myself with one last interval before I let obedience talk. Walk the 5-meter west extension as a diagonal across the wash and see whether the stripe came with me. The thermometer said 22, 20, 19 at the old stripe center, 20, 22 across, same as always. At the extension, 22, 21.3, 20.1 at a new thin band, flimsier than the old by a degree, a younger stripe or a stripe that had learned a second lane. I flagged its edges and wrote secondary cool band, weak, at +5W, parallel, synchronous with a modulation. The page turn grammar in the wash changed from long, short, long to a 4-count flutter and then a held quiet, as if someone had found the index and put a finger there to keep place. The ankle stars west of 10+4 flickered once where the new weak band crossed them, and I allowed myself one breath too quick. I am a cartographer. I set another flag. I placed a prism. I did not walk beyond the permit. Document insert, 2120 locked, but a 2112 wrist, a ZIH3. 97 logistics, report secondary band, me. Affirm at 5 meters west. 01 by 1.2 dig delta, parallel to primary. Beacon A modulates optical points and contour offsets. Tablet L, still frame holding. Logistics. Copy. No west beyond authorized 5. No synchronization. Confirm shelf stable. Me, shelf stable, quiet lens persists. I boxed no synchronization again and let my pencil sit to cool down. Then I made the mistake of being proud of my loops. Pride earns lessons. I turned from the secondary band to the inner knee line, pleased at its geometry under 2 beacons, and found the knot at the wash crossing already parted clean and retied to a mirror of the knot I had tied an hour earlier. The short end tucked the way I tuck it, but backward. My glove print at the stake had been pressed by a second glove, the way a notary stamps a signature. Same hand, mirrored. I erased both with the back of my glove, logged line adjusted, and let my neck forget it belonged to me. Station 1 at the shelf still shot clean. Station 2 at the stripe still wobbled at hundredths and then forgave itself. Tablet G slid on A like a dancer. Tablet L stood like a witness. The valley had told me how it liked its minutes. Aviation stayed cold. The notch drew its proper blank. The far north blink kept to its role, and then beacon B, the unimportant one, hiccuped a late early pair that tried, only for 2 pulses, to meet A in the middle. I didn't touch a dial. Their beats chased and kissed, off by a hair, on by a hair, and in that small moment both tablets, G and L, stamped something that was neither slide nor frame hold. North reference update. The words sat in their little system font with the politeness of firmware. My compass needle lifted off card and hung for a breath before settling a degree left of where Nevada keeps north. I held my hand off every transmit and every knob. I made myself write the words in the book so they would be real. North wavered. The ankle stars along the ladder brightened as if a curtain had moved. The cool stripe was Z, 18.9, and then 18.7 in 1/2 minute window without wind, without reason. CH2's high became 2 highs again, twin returns, coincident with the brief kiss of A and B. The topo roll on the truck bed, triple clipped, flexed inside its pencil box by a millimeter, and then quit. Logistics, I said on 3, voice a size smaller. 9-7. We just saw a north reference update on both units, a firmware message, compasses wavered, beacons, flirted. I did not synchronize. Copy, they said. Immediate, as if someone had been waiting for that noun. Hold configuration. Do not power cycle anything. Return to shelf and sit. We're conferring. I walk to the shelf because I can follow an order even when my hand wants to finish a line. The quiet lens took me in. My clap became half a clap again. The pendulum coins under the bumper stood still, all 3, as if the truck had thought about breathing and decided against it. Tablet L, locked and obedient, stamped the same message again in a thin gray. North reference, update, hold. Tablet G offered stability adjustment, delayed. Both screens showed the stripe unslid and then very gently pick itself east the width of a fingernail and stop, as if it were being polite while shifting in a chair. Through the windshield, the inner loop at knee height leaned toward the weak secondary band as if listening. The Mylar strip at the primary band winked in time with A for 3 beats and then winked in time with nobody. Beyond the loop, at the ladder's 10+4, a new faint prickle waited where a dot would be if a dot were brave. Logistics to 9-7, the radio said, careful. We'll hold A and B as configured, no further tests. Begin conservative pack down at 0300. Keep both tablets running passive. Do not touch compasses. CH2 remains receive only. Copy, I said, and wrote compasses witness only in the margin next to north. The valley had not moved. The map had nudged. The locked minute had put its shoulder against drift, and then felt something lean back. I stood under the shelf's small silence and counted Beacon A's steady beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, then late, then early, then even, then. At the wash, without light, something turned a single page and did not turn it back. Orders were to sit at the shelf, keep both tablets running passive, and do nothing clever until 3. Doing nothing clever felt like a method I hadn't studied. Beacon A pulsed even, Beacon B kept its hiccup. North reference update sat on both screens like a courtesy notice taped to a door that wasn't mine. I put my palms on my knees and let the quiet lens fold the truck around me until the sound of the AC back at the trailer lived in memory and the valley lived in everything else. Checklist, 0158 locked, 0150 wrist, second window. Beacons, A equal 1.0 1.0 steady, B equal 0.851. 15, out of phase. Radios, CH3 open, CH5 idle, CH2 record only, Vox off. Tablets, L lock, stationary at loop center, G, GNSS, stationary at stripe edge, both logging, heads, station 1 parked at shelf 2, station 2 parked at stripe 1, prisms removed, loops, outer shin height up, inner knee height up, weak secondary band flagged at 5 win, legacy, S27 cap brushed, chalk crescent quarters intact, pencil S27 untouched, paper, memo addendum, clipped under permit, topo roll, triple clipped, pencil capped, the valley wore the kind of stillness that talks you out of your own weight. Shelf clap test, half a clap again. Off the shelf, 2 full hands. I logged it dull, because dull keeps you from praying where a sentence belongs. On CH2, the tone's high had kept its twin. The second harmonic hung like a tight thread. Facing west by northwest at the stripe, amplitude peaked. At the shelf it flattened to a civil hum. Tablet G blinked stability adjustment, delayed, at intervals that chose beacon A's beat, and then ignored it. For 2 cycles, for 3. Tablet L stamped north reference update, hold, every time B's early-late pair threatened to kiss A and almost didn't. My compass needle, lying on the dash, made a small decision I felt in my teeth. It hovered on its pivot, then settled a degree left of left. Nevada's north, borrowed for a second by something that preferred a different map. I told my notebook an adult version of it. Field note 03, compasses. Transient, 1 degree deviation left of true, duration 24s, coincident with dual tablet, north reference update, stamps. No operator input. Beacons A, B, unaltered by me. Then I opened the door because a truck can make a person smaller than their work. Night air had the smell of cold plastic from the Mylar, and the ordinary mineral that comes off a basin before dawn. The stripe read 18.7 degrees, then 18.6. Dirt at the edge still rebounded under a palm, as if the ground took a second to remember being ground. Smoke pen stayed sealed because I didn't want to write glint where I could write rise. Document insert, 0206 locked, 0158 wrist. CH3, 97, logistics, hold, any change, that's me. Holding. Compasses show 1 to 2Ds left drift at update stamps. Tablets logging, shelf dampening unchanged. Logistics, copy, no configuration changes. Begin conservative pack at 0300, conservative pack at 3. The valley had another hour to insist. I walked to the outer loop with my hands behind me so I wouldn't fix anything. At the wash crossing, the reflective squares on the shin line had oriented themselves with the politeness of an assembly, half toward the primary stripe, half toward the weak band at 5 up on the knee line, retied after the mirrored knot business, held proper tension. My knot kept its handedness. I didn't tug it. You don't pick a fight with a mirror without shaving first. The ankle stars at 10, 10 plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, 4, still stood like a penestida sea sigmetis cumbibicothan. Egesis decubostidas constellation pindibegi stigisbau, to habas tembipidisibabskias, eakisisag bars. Up valley at 1, the new prickle persisted, faint and certain. At plus 5W, where the weak band crossed the ladder, a low sparkle I hadn't earned winked on beacon A's on and sulked it off. I raised a hand to eat it. It dimmed, but refused to disappear. The same stubborn not occlusion as last night. The S-27s demanded reverence I could afford. Brass cap, 7/1, standoff, 0.6 mm, chalk at NESW, magnet pulled like a habit. Pencil S-27, EDM wobble, when Station 2 looked, hudded dim breath, Tablet L saw plain wood. Tablet G wrote, stability adge, delayed, like a gossip who wants to be invited to lunch. I brushed nothing and wrote legacy steady rumor jitters, one last time for the page that goes to district. Beacon cadence put its shoulder into the hour. A thrummed even, B did its uneven walk. The stripes, primary and weak, cooled by a 10th on A's on and forgot A twice out of 10, then remembered. On CH2, the twin high split for a beat into a triplet and then rejoined itself, a chord our radios don't have a word for. The tablets stamped in their fonts with the dignity of devices that must not confess. At SU-22, locked, DATU-14, wrist, the far north white blink shifted again a thumb right along the notch rim. I put my body between it and my work, as if broad shoulders can keep a sky from talking. It didn't matter. The white long went long, and on that long the inner knee line lifted a finger's width without hands and settled, not a snap, not wind, just the measure a twine will take when the place under it draws breath. Logistics, I said, voice in the size of somebody else's throat. We've got twine lift at the inner loop. No movement on stakes. Reporting. Copy, they said. No changes. If you can, get eyes on the shelf instruments and stay there. I put myself at the shelf to be the person who stays where they're told. Tablet L. Locked time. Rolled another north reference update. Hold. Tablet G painted the contour band nearest the stripe, slid it east by 6 centimeters and then 8, then held. The HUD on Station 1 dimmed and brightened by a breath like a person testing a room's switch. The pendulum coins under the bumper stood motionless in a triangle that would have made a geometry teacher clap once. I built the last test I would get away with. Nothing transmitted, nothing configured, only paper asked to be brave. I slid the topo roll out under the truck's dome light and drew a box around the stripe and the weak band. I penciled a north arrow like a signature, then set the roll on the bed within my double pencil guard so any creep would betray itself. I promised myself not to blink. Then I blinked. The arrow didn't move. But the graphite sheen on the north arrow's head changed. Same arrow, new gloss, like a pencil line that has accepted a second pass without acquiring more lead. I touched it with the back of my knuckle. The oil on my skin convinced the light of nothing. Paper refuses to testify. Ledger, 0231. Arrow gloss change, not drift. No creep beyond pencil guard. Camera, dash cam frames, 0231, 08, 10. Locked overlay. Stripe, 18.6, 18.5 during A on plateau. B indifferent. The shelf, Vox, test off. Clap test, still half clap. CH2 amplitude flat at shelf. The page turn sound in the wash made its own ledger. One long, a gap, then one long that arrived late enough to have been somebody else's. Twin returns with drift. The latter's ankle points brightened on the second long, not the first. Tablet L's locked mine it stamped, hold, hold. Tablet G gave me delayed, then adjustment with a lag that crept from 0.62 to 0, 71 seconds, and wrote its way into a curve you could show a person who doesn't believe in curves. At Boodfu 4, locked, Liu 236, wrist, project broke radio silence with a sentence that had the weight of more rooms than mine. 9-7, logistics. Engineering requests you mark any bearing change on paper, not in device, before pack. Do not align to the tablets. Use your wristwatch. If your compass moves, write it. A and B unchanged. Copy, I said, and made the note blunt. Mark north by wrist, not by screen. I put the compass on the topo roll. It pointed it north like a good dog, then lifted off true by a degree and held. I drew the new north as a ghost arrow inside the first, dashed line. When the needle settled back, I drew a second dashed arrow, slightly less left than the first. 2 dashed arrows, 1 dog. I took my hand off the hood. The arrows stayed. If a map is a promise to tomorrow, a dashed arrow is a confession about today. I wrote Valley Without North in the top margin and put a box around it only big enough for one word to breathe. Memo, subject. Packet 3 meant my hands had to pick a direction and be done. I walked the outer loop first, clockwise, because clockwise lives nice in a binder. Each stake came up smooth. Reflective squares faced different ways their last second than their first. At the wash, where the stripe crossed, the shin line snagged my glove as if the twine had found teeth. I freed it without making a theory. The inner knee line I took down second, left to right, threading twine into coils that would forgive me in daylight. The knot at the wash stayed the knot I remembered. That counted as mercy. Station 2 at stripe 1 came off last because legacy should be first and last. I put a soft brush over the tripod feet divots out of habit, then didn't, left them clear, a courtesy for morning truth. Station 1 at shelf 2 went to case without a complaint. The coins went back into a bag where metal doesn't get to have opinions. Document insert, 03 Aquah locked, 0252 wrist. CH3, 97 logistics. Begin wheels in 10. Keep A, B on until gate 4 unless instructed. Me. 9-7. Wheels in 10. Both tablets remain recording passive. Compasses logged. I tucked the memo addendum under the permit in the Tyvek sleeve and let the sleeve breathe its page sound once. The Mylar strip at the primary stripe winked 3 times in time with A like a person tapping a table. The ankle stars along the ladder dimmed to almost gone, and then picked a brightness I would call a choice if I were allowed to write the word. I slid into the cab. The shelf's quiet lens thinned the way fog thins without moving. The dashcam watched my hands be careful with keys. I released the brake and let the truck ease off the rectangle that had forgotten and remembered sound all night. Gravel did gravel. Beacon A washed the windshield in amber. Beacon B made its offbeat light, which the cab learned and then ignored. At the edge of headlight reach, the wash lay over its stripe the way a record lies over a groove. The weak band at 5W showed itself as a smudge in my knowing more than in my sight. The far north blink did 2 short, 1 long. On CH2, the twin high returned with a harmony above it that wanted a name. I took my hand off the wheel long enough to touch the topo tube, which is how I remind myself I am a person who draws the world when it won't sit for a photograph. The tube thumped once with the next dip in the road, then thumped again a half beat late, a twin return of the sort you can explain forever and never forgive. Gate 4 made its rectangle of sodium light at the far edge of everything. The guard had 2 fingers ready, the permission sign, and the clipboard set to a line that would become times. The valley sat behind me like something a person doesn't turn their back on, but must. Beacon A's pulses ran even. Beacon B's hiccups continued to refuse friendship. The compass on the dash lay flat and then hovered a degree left, all the way to the gate. 9-7, logistics said in my ear, voice made of rooms. Hold beacons until we count your plates, then both off. Bring the locked first. Copy, I said. The shelf that wasn't under me anymore let the truck be loud again. The Tyvek sleeve in the dash pocket gave me its page turn the way a person clears a throat at the end of a story, then did not turn again. I rolled to the line. The sodium lamp buzzed. A moth woke and forgot and woke. The clipboard took my number and wrote one time in a column that would be married later to someone else's time. I made my own line on my own page and wrote a subject that would live above paragraphs I do not yet know how to keep honest. Valley without north. Beacon A went off. Beacon B went off. CH2's high held for a beat longer than it had any right to, and in that one beat the compass needle on the dash lifted off its card and failed to land where the world keeps north.